My brother kept breaking into my apartment, so I moved without telling him and let him face the police. My parents accused me of setting him up and tried to ruin my career to pay his bail. But when we all ended up in a federal deposition, I slid a decrypted flash drive across the table. The prosecutor stopped the tape, looked at my parents, and asked if they realized what I had just handed him. It was their entire money laundering ledger. I just smiled and prepared to speak. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with a family that treated your success like their personal bank account. I am Chloe, 29 years old. I work as a data security specialist in Chicago. I spend my days building digital walls, encrypting sensitive networks, and keeping corporate predators locked out of private servers. My career revolves around identifying vulnerabilities. Yet, I ignored the most glaring security flaw in my own life. I returned to my apartment on a Tuesday evening after a 3-day cybersecurity conference in Seattle. The hallway of my building was quiet. I pulled my suitcase over the threshold, intending to unlock the door, but my hand froze on the doorknob. A fresh, jagged scratch marred the brass surface of the deadbolt. I pushed the door open. The apartment looked undisturbed at first glance. The throw pillows sat in their usual arrangement on the sofa. The kitchen counters were clear, but a perimeter check is instinctual in my line of work. I walked straight to my home office. The charging cable on my desk lay coiled on the glass surface, but my backup laptop was missing. I pivoted and strode into my bedroom, dropping to my knees to check the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of my closet. The fireproof lockbox containing $2,000 in emergency cash was gone. I did not dial emergency services. I stood up, walked into the living room, and retrieved my tablet. 3 months ago, I suspected someone had been moving things in my apartment while I was at the office. I purchased a high-definition surveillance camera, disguised as a standard air purifier, and placed it on the media console. I connected the device to a secure, encrypted cloud server. I opened the application and scrubbed through the time-stamped footage from yesterday afternoon. The video loaded. I watched the front door swing open. Derek walked into my living room. My 32-year-old brother, chronically unemployed and perpetually entitled, did not use a crowbar. He used a copied brass key. He strolled into my kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and drank orange juice directly from the carton. He wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve, walked into my bedroom, and emerged 5 minutes later carrying my laptop and my metal lockbox. He tucked them under his arm, locked the front door behind him, and vanished. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It rang twice before someone answered. It was not Derek. Nancy, my mother, spoke into the receiver. Her tone carried the familiar, grating edge of preemptive defense. "Before you start yelling," she snapped, "you need to lower your voice. Your brother is resting." I watched the surveillance footage loop on my tablet. Derek just robbed my apartment, I stated, keeping my voice flat and clinical. He took my hardware and my cash. I have him on a high-definition feed. Nancy let out a loud, theatrical sigh, treating my stolen property like a minor inconvenience. He is going through a rough patch. Chloe, you earn 6 figures sitting at a computer all day. You have more than enough to share. He needed seed money for a new business idea. Stealing a lockbox is not a startup venture, I replied. It is a felony. I want my property back tonight. The line went silent for a fraction of a second before her temper flared. You listen to me, Nancy hissed, the maternal facade dropping to reveal the enabler beneath. Derek is family. We look out for each other. If you ruin his life by calling the police over a few spare dollars, you are dead to us. Do not test me. Chloe. She ended the call. The dial tone buzzed in the quiet room. I stood in the center of my apartment. The reality of the situation crystallized with cold precision. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as a resource. My tolerance was merely a ticket for their continued extraction, an unmonitored supply line. I did not call her back to argue. I did not shed a tear over the threat of disownment. You cannot negotiate with parasites. You can only sever the host. I walked into my bedroom, grabbed a heavy duffel bag, and began packing. I was going to evaporate from their network before the sun came up. The evaporation process required precision and resources. I zipped the heavy canvas duffel bag and picked up my phone, dialing a number I reserved for genuine emergencies. The call connected on the second ring. Marcus is my brother-in-law. He married my older sister 5 years ago. Standing by her side as she systematically cut all ties with our toxic parents and moved across the country. Marcus is an African-American executive who oversees commercial property management for a premier real estate firm in the city. He spends his days negotiating multi-million-dollar leases, evicting hostile corporate tenants, and navigating high-stakes contracts. He operates with a calm, predatory efficiency. I did not offer a tearful explanation over the phone. I gave him a brief status report and asked for logistical support. Marcus arrived at my apartment building 90 minutes later, long before the sun began to rise over the Chicago skyline. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, projecting an aura of unflappable authority as he stepped over my broken deadbolt. He surveyed the missing electronics and the scratched brass lock. He did not offer useless sympathy. He reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out an encrypted tablet, and went to work. You cannot sign a standard residential lease if you want to disappear, Marcus explained, his fingers flying across the digital screen. Data brokers scrape public utility registries and tenant databases every 24 hours. If your name goes on to a new rental agreement today, Derek will find your new address by Friday. We are bypassing the standard registry. Marcus utilized his executive access to a portfolio of luxury high-rise buildings managed by his firm. He drafted an expedited leasing contract, placing a secure, penthouse-level apartment under the name of a dormant shell corporation his firm kept on retainer for high-profile clients seeking anonymity. The corporate entity, a generic consulting firm registered in Delaware, shielded the true occupant identity from any public inquiry. While Marcus secured the physical fortress, I initiated the digital scrub. Sitting on the floor of my living room, I opened my primary laptop and launched a sequence of automated privacy scripts. I systematically opted out of every major data broker index, erasing my name, phone number, and voting registry address from the open internet. I rerouted my mail to a secure, private postal box registered 2 towns away. By the time the morning traffic began to hum on the streets below, Chloe was a ghost in the machine. We moved my essential belongings using a discreet, unmarked cargo van Marcus had procured. We left the bulky furniture behind. It was a small price to pay for immediate security. Before we closed the door on the old apartment, I executed the final phase of my extraction. 3 years ago, Nancy had orchestrated a relentless guilt trip, demanding I add Derek as an authorized user on one of my premium credit cards. She claimed that he needed it for emergency groceries and gas while interviewing for jobs. I had monitored the account, absorbing his petty charges to avoid her screaming phone calls. I logged into my banking application. I located the supplementary platinum card bearing Derek's name. I did not suspend the account or lower the limit. I initiated a permanent closure protocol, severing his financial lifeline with a single keystroke. The digital cord was cut. 3 days passed in absolute silence. I settled into my new high-rise apartment, watching the city lights from a secure vantage point. The security protocols in the new building required biometric access at the lobby and the elevator bank. My firm updated my remote work credentials, allowing me to maintain my daily operations without stepping foot in an exposed public space. The silence shattered on Friday afternoon. Derek reality collided with his entitlement at a sports bar in the downtown district. I received an automated alert on my phone, notifying me of a declined transaction attempt for $85. 10 minutes later, another alert pinged. Declined transaction at a nearby liquor store. Panic is a predictable catalyst. Stripped of his stolen funds and unable to drain my credit, Derek resorted to his standard tactic. He drove directly to my old apartment, expecting to find me sitting on the sofa, ready to absorb his temper tantrum and hand over a fresh stack of cash. Marcus had kept his administrative access to the security cameras in the hallway of my former building. We sat in my new living room, projecting the live feed onto my television screen. Derek marched down the familiar corridor. He wore a stained hooded sweatshirt, his posture rigid with entitlement. He reached the door with the scratched lock and did not bother knocking. He pulled his copied brass key from his pocket, shoved it into the cylinder, and twisted. The door swung open. Through the lens of the hallway camera, I watched Derek step inside. I could imagine the exact view greeting him. Bare walls, no television, no sofa, no sister waiting to be extorted. The apartment was a hollow echo chamber. Derek staggered backward into the hallway, his face a portrait of utter confusion melting into frantic rage. He pulled out his phone. My device on the coffee table began to buzz. I watched the caller identification flash his name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. He called 6 times in rapid succession. When I refused to answer, the text messages began pouring in, a digital barrage of escalating threats. Where are you? Turn my card back on right now. You think you can hide from me? When the text messages failed to provoke a response, Derek resorted to a voice recording. The voicemail notification chimed. I tapped the speaker icon, allowing his venomous voice to fill my secure living room. You think this is a game? Chloe. Derek spat, his breathing ragged and heavy. You think you can just pack up and cut me off without consequences? Mom is furious. You owe us. If you do not text me your new address and turn that credit card back on within 1 hour, I am driving to your corporate office on Monday morning. I am going to stand in your fancy lobby and tell your bosses exactly what kind of thief you are. I will smash every glass desk in that building until you come down and hand me a new set of keys. You cannot run from family. The voicemail ended. The threat was explicit. He was planning to weaponize public humiliation, intending to destroy my professional reputation to extort financial compliance. I looked at Marcus. He was leaning back in a leather armchair, sipping a glass of sparkling water. He did not look concerned by the promise of the workplace vandalism. A slow, calculated smile spread across his face, the kind of smile a chess player offers when the opponent walks blindly into a checkmate. Let him make his plans for Monday, Marcus said, setting his glass onto the table. He is assuming you broke your residential lease and surrendered the old unit back to the property management company. I tilted my head, waiting for the strategic reveal. I did not break the lease. I confirmed. No, you did not, Marcus replied, his voice smooth and deliberate. As the regional director overseeing that specific building, I have the authority to expedite lease transfers. I did not return your unit to the public market. I executed a private sublease agreement yesterday afternoon. Marcus tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up a digital dossier. You see, a man lacking boundaries will inevitably return to the scene of his perceived authority, Marcus explained. Derek thinks that apartment belongs to him because he possesses a copied key. He will wait for the weekend. Assume you left valuables behind in your haste, and attempt another quiet entry. He relies on your predictable pacifism. Marcus turned the tablet toward me. The screen displayed the profile of a man with a stern jawline and a military haircut, dressed in a tactical uniform. I leased your old unit to a professional contact of mine. Marcus continued. His name is Kendrick. He is a senior officer with the Narcotics Task Force. He works overnight shifts and values extreme privacy. He moved his belongings in this morning. I looked at the profile, absorbing the magnitude of the countermeasure. You put a federal narcotics officer in my old apartment. Marcus shook his head, his smile widening. I put a K-9 handler in your old apartment. The implications locked into place. Derek held a key to a door that no longer opened to a vulnerable sister. He held a key to a tactical stronghold. The board was set, and the thief was preparing to walk directly into the jaws of the law. Saturday night settled over Chicago with a biting chill. Inside my new high-rise apartment, The climate control maintained a perfect 70 degrees. The city lights spread out below the floor-to-ceiling windows, a grid of amber and white cutting through the darkness. I sat at my kitchen island, a cup of black coffee resting beside my laptop. Marcus sat across from me, his tailored suit jacket draped over the back of a bar stool. We did not speak much. We were waiting for the inevitable. I had routed the administrative access from my old building's security network directly into my encrypted server. A secondary monitor on my desk displayed a live, high-definition feed of the fifth-floor corridor. The hallway was empty. The beige carpet and pale walls looked exactly as I had left them. But behind the door of Unit 502, the ecosystem had drastically shifted. Kendrick was not a standard tenant. Marcus had selected him from a very specific pool of professional contacts. Kendrick served as a senior handler for the Regional Narcotics Task Force. His hours were erratic, often requiring him to sleep during the day and work through the night. He lived a Spartan existence, prioritizing utility over comfort. He did not bring decorative furniture or delicate electronics into the space. He brought his partner. Titan was a purebred German Shepherd, bred in Europe and imported specifically for tactical law enforcement. He weighed 90 pounds, a dense composite of muscle, bone, and conditioned instinct. A civilian dog barks at the mail carrier or whines for table scraps. A working K9 operates on a different frequency. Titan was trained to clear buildings, subdue armed fugitives, and detect chemical contraband. He did not issue warnings. He observed his environment, calculated the threat level, and waited for a trigger. When Kendrick was off duty, Titan treated the apartment as a designated secure zone. Any unauthorized entry was not merely a trespass. It was a hostile breach. At 11:45, a small green indicator light pulsed in the corner of my screen. The motion sensors in the fifth-floor hallway had detected activity. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the quartz countertop. Marcus checked his watch and turned his attention to the monitor. The elevator doors at the end of the corridor slid open. Derek stepped into the frame. He looked worse than he had on Friday afternoon. The arrogance that usually carried his posture was gone, replaced by a jittery, desperate energy. He wore a dark hooded sweatshirt pulled up over his head, a weak attempt to conceal his identity from the overhead cameras. A heavy canvas duffel bag hung from his right shoulder. He walked with a rapid, uneven stride, his head swiveling to check the empty hallway. He had spent the last 48 hours cut off from my financial resources. Without my credit card, he could not pay his bar tabs, cover his car insurance, or fund his daily habits. His logic, twisted by entitlement, convinced him that I had fled in a state of irrational panic. In his mind, an abrupt departure meant I had left valuable assets behind. He likely expected to find my flat-screen television still mounted to the wall, my designer coats hanging in the closet, and perhaps a jewelry box sitting on the dresser. He viewed my old apartment as an unattended vault, waiting to be emptied. Derek reached the door of Unit 502. He did not knock. He did not press his ear against the wood to check for movement inside. He reached into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out the brass key he had copied weeks ago. He shoved the key into the cylinder and turned his wrist. The mechanism did not yield. On the screen, I watched Derek frown. He pulled the key out, inspected the jagged teeth under the hallway lights, and shoved it back into the lock. He twisted harder, putting his shoulder into the motion. The metal ground uselessly against the pins. Marcus let out a quiet, knowing exhale, standard protocol for any premium property transfer. Marcus noted, his eyes fixed on the feed. The maintenance team swaps the core cylinders the moment a new lease is signed. Your brother is locked out. Derek realized the same thing. Through the silent video feed, I saw his frustration boil over. He kicked the base of the door, his sneaker leaving a scuff mark on the white paint. He believed I had changed the locks just to spite him, further fueling his narrative of victimization. He backed away, pacing a tight circle in the narrow corridor. He pulled out his phone, stared at the blank screen for a few seconds, and shoved it away. He was out of options. He needed capital, and he believed the solution was resting just on the other side of that drywall. He reached into the canvas duffel bag hanging from his shoulder. When he pulled his hand out, he was holding a short, forged steel crowbar. He had come prepared for a physical breach. The tool was painted black, designed to pry open crates and dismantle heavy wooden pallets. Derek gripped the textured handle, stepped up to the doorframe, and wedged the wedged tip into the narrow gap between the door and the jamb, right above the deadbolt assembly. He leaned his body weight against the steel bar. I watched the wood trims splinter on the monitor. Small fragments of white paint chipped away, falling onto the beige carpet. Derek gritted his teeth, his face contorting with physical effort. He was not a skilled burglar. He lacked the finesse of a professional thief. He relied on brute force, ignorant of the noise he was generating. Inside the apartment, the environment was pitch black. Kendrick was likely asleep in the primary bedroom, recovering from a demanding tactical shift. But Titan did not sleep the way humans do. A working dog maintains a baseline level of sensory awareness. The moment the steel crowbar scraped against the brass strike plate, the shepherd would have registered the anomaly. He would not whine. He would not pace. He would position himself in the dark hallway, his muscles coiled, his eyes adjusting to the ambient light bleeding under the door sweep. Derek repositioned the crowbar, finding a better angle of leverage. He planted his boots firmly against the carpet and threw his entire upper body backward. The doorframe groaned under the immense pressure. The metal strike plate began to bend, the screws tearing out of the wooden studs. I could not hear the noise through the silent video feed, but the physical destruction was vivid. Derek's face was flushed, slick with sweat. He was committed to the invasion. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. His expression was a study in detached fascination. "He is crossing the threshold," Marcus murmured. "There is no plausible deniability after the wood snaps." Derek gave the crowbar one final, violent heave. The locking mechanism failed. The deadbolt tore through the splintered frame. The heavy wooden door swung inward, hitting the interior wall with a visual force that shook the camera mounting. Derek stumbled forward, losing his balance as the resistance vanished. He caught himself on the doorframe, the steel crowbar still gripped tightly in his right hand. He stood at the threshold, peering into the pitch-black apartment. The hallway lights cast a long, distorted shadow into the empty living room. He reached toward the interior wall, his fingers brushing against the drywall, searching for the light switch. He expected to illuminate a space filled with my abandoned property. He expected a quiet, easy robbery. Instead, a low, guttural vibration emanated from the darkness. It was not a bark. It was a frequency, a deep, rumbling growl that originated deep within a broad, muscular chest. The sound carried the unmistakable signature of an apex predator registering a threat. Derek froze. His hand hovered inches away from the light switch. His eyes widened, pupils dilating as he stared into the unlit corridor. The arrogance drained from his posture, replaced by a sudden, primal realization. He was not alone in the apartment. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness of the living room. Two eyes, reflecting the dim hallway illumination, locked onto the intruder. The silhouette of the German shepherd materialized, head lowered, ears pinned flat against a broad skull. The dog stood perfectly still, blocking the path, waiting for a single sudden movement or a command from the bedroom. Derek stood paralyzed on the threshold, holding a weapon he did not know how to use against an opponent he never expected to face. The silence stretched for a fraction of a second, heavy and suffocating. The trap had closed, and the hunter was preparing to strike. Derek holding the crowbar, the dog growling. A civilian might freeze or retreat. Derek, fueled by entitlement and adrenaline, tightened his grip on the steel bar. He raised it, perhaps intending to intimidate the animal, perhaps intending to strike. In the highly conditioned mind of a tactical K9, a raised weapon is not a threat. It is a green light. The kinetic transfer was instantaneous. Titan did not leap in a wide, theatrical arc. He launched forward like a coiled spring, releasing a heavy projectile. 90 pounds of muscle and teeth crossed the threshold in a blur of dark fur. The impact caught Derek squarely in the chest. The force of the collision threw my brother backward. His boots left the carpet. He flew out of the apartment and crashed hard onto the floor of the hallway. The forged steel crowbar slipped from his grasp, skittering uselessly against the baseboards. On my computer screen, the silent video feed captured a masterpiece of retrained suppression. Titan did not go for the throat. He executed a flawless controlling bite. His jaws locked onto Derek's right forearm, the same arm that had wielded the weapon seconds prior. The grip was unyielding. The German Shepherd pinned the intruder to the floor, using his body weight to neutralize any counterattack. Derek's mouth opened wide, his face contorted in an expression of raw, unadulterated agony. Without audio, the visual was striking. He thrashed his legs, attempting to kick the dog away, but Titan simply clamped down harder, shaking his head once to assert dominance. The message was clear. Any resistance would result in shredded muscle tissue. Derek stopped fighting. He lay flat on his back, his left hand hovering uselessly in the air, his body trembling in shock. The commotion in the corridor was brief. A tactical response requires brevity. 15 seconds after the initial impact, a figure emerged from the dark interior of Unit 502. Officer Kendrick stepped into the hallway light. He moved with the fluid, calculated precision of a man accustomed to midnight raids and hostile environments. He wore dark athletic shorts and a gray t-shirt. His stance was wide, his center of gravity low. In his hands, he held a black service pistol, the muzzle pointed firmly at the floor, his finger resting flat along the receiver. Kendrick did not shout. He did not panic. He assessed the shattered doorframe, the discarded crowbar, and the bleeding man pinned to the floor by his partner. He processed the crime scene in a fraction of a second. Felony breaking and entering. Armed intruder. Threat neutralized. Kendrick issued a single, sharp command. Titan immediately released his grip. The dog stepped back, sitting on his haunches near Derek's head, his eyes remaining locked on the target, ready to strike again if the intruder twitched. Kendrick holstered his weapon. He stepped forward, grabbed Derek by the shoulder of his hooded sweatshirt, and flipped him onto his stomach with practiced efficiency. Derek offered zero resistance. He was weeping openly, clutching his bleeding arm. Kendrick pulled a pair of heavy-duty zip ties from his pocket, securing Derek's wrists tightly behind his back. The arrest was sterile. It was a mechanical procedure, executed by a professional. Kendrick pulled a radio from his waistband and keyed the microphone to dispatch local patrol units. Marcus reached out and tapped the keyboard on my desk. Pausing the live feed, the image froze on Derek, face down on the hallway carpet, blood staining the beige fibers beneath his arm. The perimeter held, Marcus stated, his voice calm and even. The police will process him. He will be transported to the emergency room under guard, and then directly to county lockup. You do not need to watch the rest. I closed the laptop. The glow of the screen vanished, leaving the kitchen bathed in the soft amber light of the city below. We had successfully defended the asset without firing a single shot or raising our voices. Derek had orchestrated his own downfall, guided by his own greed. Marcus left shortly after, returning to his own home. I went to bed and slept for the first time in weeks without keeping one ear tuned to the sound of my front door. The peace lasted exactly 5 hours. At 4:15 in the morning, the digital clock on my nightstand cast a red glow across the room. My phone, resting on the glass surface, began to vibrate. The screen illuminated the dark bedroom. The caller identification displayed a name I had anticipated. Nancy. The authorities had processed Derek. They had treated his lacerations, booked him into a holding cell, and allowed him his statutory phone call. He had called his mother. I picked up the device. I did not feel dread. I felt the cold, analytical focus of a technician diagnosing a system error. I swiped the screen and brought the speaker to my ear. I did not say hello. "Chloe," Nancy shrieked. Her voice did not carry the sleepy confusion of a mother woken in the middle of the night. It possessed a shrill, piercing frequency fueled by pure outrage. "What did you do?" she demanded, the words tumbling over each other. "You set a trap for your own flesh and blood. You engineered this. You left that apartment on purpose and planted a feral beast inside to attack him." I sat up in bed, resting my back against the headboard. "Your son used a crowbar to pry open a locked door in the middle of the night," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "He broke into a residence occupied by a federal narcotics officer. The dog was simply doing its job. He was looking for you." Nancy screamed, twisting the narrative to fit her delusion. "He was worried about you because you disappeared without a word. He thought you were in trouble. He was carrying a duffel bag to steal my electronics." I corrected her. "He was looking for a payout." "You are a monster," Nancy hissed, discarding the excuse and pivoting directly to extortion. "You are a cold, calculated monster. Derek is sitting in a hospital ward, chained to a bed. His arm is torn open. He needs surgery. And the police are charging him with a felony. The bail bondsman requires a 10% cash deposit by sunrise, or they are transferring him to maximum security." She paused, taking a ragged breath, preparing to deliver her mandate. "You are going to wire $10,000 to my account right now," Nancy ordered. "You will pay for his bail, and you will cover every single medical bill. If you do not transfer those funds, I swear to you, Chloe, I will make you regret the day you were born." Extortion relies on emotional leverage. A threat is only effective if the target fears the consequences. I looked out the window at the silent city. I had spent my entire adult life tiptoeing around their demands, sacrificing my own financial stability to keep the peace. That dynamic was dead. "I do not negotiate with criminals," I stated. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear her drawing a breath to launch another wave of verbal abuse. I tapped the red icon. The call terminated, plunging the room back into silence. I opened the contact settings, navigated to her profile, and selected the block caller option. I repeated the process for my father number. I placed the phone back onto the nightstand and lay down. I knew the silence would not last. Narcissists do not accept boundaries. When you deny them access, they do not reflect on their actions. They view the rejection as an unforgivable insult. By refusing to pay the $10,000 ransom, I had not just denied them money, I had stripped away their control. Nancy and Richard were currently sitting in their suburban home, realizing their primary funding source had evaporated. They could not reach me by phone. They did not know my physical address. Their son was facing a prison sentence they could not afford to buy him out of. Desperation breeds destructive creativity. If they could not break into my home, they would target the only remaining coordinate they possessed. They would target the foundation of my independence. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gray, I knew the physical confrontation was over. The tactical war was just beginning. My parents were preparing to march into my corporate headquarters. They intended to drag their domestic chaos into my professional sanctuary, intending to burn my career to the ground until I handed over the cash. They thought my silence was a sign of vulnerability. They were about to discover it was the loading sequence of a digital counterstrike. The weekend passed in digital silence, but I did not mistake their absence for surrender. I understand the mechanics of a breach. When hackers face a blocked port, they do not pack up and go home. They pivot to social engineering. They target the human element. My parents were preparing to target my professional reputation. I countered their move before the corporate offices even opened. At 8 o'clock Monday morning, I stood before a Cook County magistrate. I presented the verified police report detailing my brother's armed intrusion, alongside printed transcripts of the extortion voicemails my mother had left on my phone. The judge required less than 3 minutes to assess the threat level. He signed an emergency order of protection. A binding legal mandate prohibiting my parents from coming within 500 feet of my person, my residence, or my place of employment. I placed the stamped document into my leather briefcase and headed to the financial district. My firm occupies 3 upper floors of a modern glass tower in the Loop, but our primary client intake center is situated on the ground level, just past the main building atrium. The environment is designed to project impenetrable security. Polished concrete floors, frosted glass partitions, and biometric turnstiles dictate the flow of foot traffic. We handle encrypted ledgers for regional banks and secure medical databases. Discretion is our primary commodity. I arrived at 9, draped my tailored wool trench coat over a chair beside the reception desk, and began reviewing the weekend access logs with Sarah, our front desk coordinator. At 9:15, the heavy revolving doors at the front of the atrium spun rapidly. Nancy and Richard marched into the lobby. They did not resemble the aggressive extortionists from the phone calls. Nancy had orchestrated a visual masterpiece of suburban tragedy. She wore a faded beige sweater and sensible flat shoes, her hair purposefully disheveled. Richard walked half a step behind her, a stoic enforcer wearing a heavy denim jacket. They bypassed the standard visitor sign in kiosk and headed directly toward our glass-walled perimeter. Sarah stood up, her hand hovering over the silent alarm button beneath her desk. "May I help you?" she asked, maintaining a professional distance. Nancy ignored the receptionist. She scanned the sleek lobby, her eyes locking onto me. The performance commenced instantly. Nancy did not just cry. She wailed. The sound was high-pitched and sharp, engineered to cut through the quiet hum of the corporate environment. 3 high-net-worth clients sitting in the waiting area lowered their tablets, staring in shock. My mother fell against the edge of the reception desk, clutching her chest. "Where is she?" Nancy sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured agony. "You have a thief working in this building." "My own daughter. She drained our retirement accounts. She stole our savings and left her brother to rot in a hospital bed. Please, I just need to speak to her. We are facing foreclosure because of her." The accusation was a calculated lie, designed to trigger maximum reputational damage. In the financial security sector, an employee accused of embezzling family funds becomes an immediate liability. Nancy expected me to rush forward, panic, and usher her into a private conference room to negotiate a cash settlement in exchange for her silence. She expected a frantic daughter trying to save her job. She received a crisis manager. I did not raise my voice. I did not attempt to defend my character to the staring clients. I caught the eye of David, our director of physical security, who was already stepping out of the surveillance hub. I gave him a single, slight nod. David and 2 uniformed guards moved swiftly, forming a tactical triangle around my parents. They did not initiate physical contact, but their presence established a rigid barrier. "Ma'am, you are disrupting a private business," David stated, his tone flat and unyielding. "You need to lower your voice and exit the premises immediately." Richard stepped forward, puffing out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate the security chief. "Nobody is leaving until this girl comes to the bank with us and fixes what she broke." My father growled. "She owes her family." I walked out from behind the reception counter. I unclasped my leather briefcase, retrieved the blue-backed court document, and laid it flat on the smooth marble surface of the desk. "I am not going to a bank," I informed them, keeping my voice devoid of any emotional cadence. "I am enforcing a judicial boundary. This is an active restraining order signed by a magistrate 2 hours ago. You are currently in violation of a court mandate." Nancy stopped crying. Her eyes darted from the document to my face. The realization that she had lost the narrative struck her. She had brought a theatrical performance to a legal battlefield. Before she could pivot to a new tactic, the glass doors of the atrium opened again. 2 uniformed Chicago police officers walked into the lobby. David had triggered the silent alarm the moment they bypassed the visitor kiosk. The officers approached the desk, glanced at the signed order I provided, and immediately turned to my parents. "Sir, ma'am, You need to step away from the desk and place your hands where I can see them," the lead officer instructed, his hand resting near his duty belt. "You are trespassing in violation of a protective order. Defeat is a bitter pill for a narcissist. But Nancy is a survivor of her own toxic design. When a frontal assault fails, she opts for sabotage. The officers moved in to escort them out. Nancy decided to execute one final, desperate maneuver. She faked a sudden wave of dizziness. She let her knees buckle, collapsing toward the reception counter. A police officer caught her by the arm to prevent her from hitting the floor. But the staged fall achieved its true purpose. As Nancy lunged downward, her left hand swept across the chair where my wool trench coat rested. Her fingers brushed the fabric. It was a fluid, almost imperceptible motion. She slipped her hand into the deep side pocket of the coat, deposited a small object, and withdrew her hand in a fraction of a second. "Do not touch me," Nancy snapped, suddenly regaining her balance and shaking off the officer grip. "We are leaving." She did not look at me as the police marched them toward the exit. Richard followed, his head down, humiliated by the public escort. The heavy revolving doors swallowed them, depositing them onto the cold city pavement outside. The lobby grew quiet. David apologized to the clients, offering them fresh coffee and seamlessly restoring the corporate tranquility. Sarah let out a long breath, her hands shaking slightly over her keyboard. I picked up my trench coat from the chair, folded it over my arm, and walked toward the elevator bank to begin my workday. I felt nothing unusual. The weight of the fabric felt the same. I believed the physical threat had been neutralized. I believed the legal perimeter would hold them at bay. I was wrong. 2 miles away, sitting in the passenger seat of Richard's car, Nancy wiped the remaining fake tears from her face. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure, predatory focus. She reached into her purse and pulled out her smartphone. She opened a native tracking application. The screen loaded a digital map of the downtown grid. A single, bright red beacon began to pulse on the digital display, transmitting a precise geographic coordinate. She had dropped a coin-sized tracking device into my pocket during her theatrical fall. She did not need to negotiate anymore. She knew exactly where I worked. And more importantly, when I went home tonight, that pulsing red dot would lead her straight to the secret fortress Marcus had built. The workday concluded at 6 o'clock. I packed my laptop into my briefcase, draped my wool trench coat over my arm, and took the private elevator down to the underground executive parking garage. The concrete space was quiet, echoing only with the sound of my heels against the pavement. I unlocked my vehicle, slid into the driver's seat, and pressed the ignition button. Before I could shift into gear, a distinct, sharp alert tone filled the cabin. It did not come from my primary smartphone. It originated from a secondary, modified device I keep mounted on my dashboard. As a data security specialist, I do not rely on standard commercial firewalls. My vehicle is equipped with a localized radio frequency scanner, designed to detect unauthorized Bluetooth low-energy beacons operating within a 10-foot radius. A notification pulsed on the dark screen. "Unknown tracking device traveling with you." I did not panic. I engaged the parking brake and left the engine running. I picked up my trench coat from the passenger seat. I ran my fingers along the hem, up the lapels, and finally into the deep side pockets. My fingers brushed against a small, smooth object resting at the very bottom of the left pocket lining. I pulled it out and held it up to the overhead dome light. A white, coin-sized disc. An AirTag. The pieces of the morning ambush snapped into place. Nancy had not faked a dizzy spell because she felt overwhelmed. She executed a deliberate physical diversion. She weaponized her own theatrical collapse to breach my physical perimeter and plant a homing beacon on my person. She assumed I would drive straight from the office to my hidden apartment, leading her directly to my new sanctuary. My initial instinct was to crush the plastic disc under the heel of my boot. Destroying the device would sever the connection and protect my location. But a security professional knows that blinding an enemy only forces them to find a new vantage point. If the signal vanished in the basement of my corporate office, Nancy would know I had discovered her trap. She would return tomorrow with a different strategy. I needed to feed her a false narrative. I needed to exhaust her resources. I placed the tracker into the cup holder, shifted the car into drive, and exited the garage. I did not head toward my secure high-rise. I steered my vehicle toward the industrial logistics corridor located on the western edge of the city, near the freight terminals. The sun had set, and the temperature was dropping rapidly, threatening an early winter storm. I pulled into a sprawling, brightly lit truck stop. Diesel fumes hung heavy in the freezing air. Rows of massive semi-trucks idled in the staging area, their engines rumbling as drivers prepared for long-haul interstate routes. I parked near the edge of the lot, grabbed a piece of heavy-duty mounting tape from my glove compartment, and stepped out into the cold. I walked briskly down the line of idling vehicles. I targeted a specific unit, a 53-foot refrigerated trailer. The side panel displayed the logo of a national meatpacking distributor. The driver was inside the cab, reviewing his manifest, preparing to depart. I walked past the rear wheels, crouched low, and pressed the mounting tape against the white plastic disc. I reached under the steel chassis of the trailer and firmly attached the tracker to a structural crossbeam. Well hidden from casual view, I walked back to my car, merged onto the highway, and drove home to my untraceable apartment. The psychological warfare had officially commenced. From my kitchen island, I opened a proprietary tracking dashboard on my laptop. I had cloned the Bluetooth signature of the device before attaching it to the truck. I watched a small digital marker represent the movement of the refrigerated trailer. Across the city, a very different scene was unfolding inside my parents' suburban home. Derek was no longer sitting in a county holding cell. The bail bondsman had demanded a 10% cash deposit to secure his release after the felony armed intrusion charge. Because I refused to pay the ransom, my parents were forced to liquidate their remaining assets. Richard had driven to a predatory lending office, signed away the remaining equity in their house, and taken out a high-interest second mortgage just to buy his son freedom. Derek returned home with a stitched forearm and a shattered ego. He was facing a trial, potential prison time, and financial ruin. But when Nancy showed him the red dot moving on her phone screen, fear morphed into a vengeful obsession. The digital marker was accelerating away from Chicago, merging onto Interstate 90, heading northwest. In their desperate, fractured minds, they interpreted the data exactly as I wanted them to. They assumed I had discovered Derek was out on bail. They believed I was terrified. They concluded I was fleeing the state in a blind panic, driving through the night to escape their wrath. Derek and Nancy did not hesitate. They piled into Richard's sedan, fueled by a toxic mixture of vengeance and a desire to corner me. They merged onto the highway and began the pursuit. 2 hours into their drive, the weather deteriorated. A severe winter squall descended over the Midwest. The temperature plummeted, turning the rain into driving sleet, then into heavy, blinding snow. The highway turned into a treacherous ribbon of black ice. Visibility dropped to near zero. I sat in my climate-controlled apartment, sipping hot tea, watching their digital pursuit on my monitor. They drove for 7 agonizing hours. They burned through a tank of gas, gripping the steering wheel, fighting the blizzard, driven solely by the anticipation of dragging me out of my car and forcing me to surrender my bank accounts. Shortly after 2 in the morning, the refrigerated truck pulled into a commercial way station just across the Wisconsin border. It parked in the designated cargo lot. 20 minutes later, my parents' vehicle arrived at the same coordinates. I could visualize the crushing weight of their realization. Derek and Nancy stepped out of their sedan into the freezing, knee-deep snow. They held up the smartphone, following the directional arrows, walking past rows of silent vehicles. The signal did not lead them to my compact car. The arrow pointed directly to the frozen undercarriage of a commercial meat hauler. They had mortgaged their home, risked their lives in a blizzard, and spent 7 hours chasing a cargo container filled with frozen beef. The humiliation was absolute. The tracker went offline shortly after. Derek had likely ripped it from the chassis and hurled it into a snowbank in a fit of feral rage. The long drive back to Chicago in the snowstorm finalized the shift in Derek's tactical approach. Physical intimidation had resulted in a dog bite and a felony charge. Social engineering had resulted in a public escort by the police. The physical world was hostile territory for him. He realized he could not corner me in person. He decided to strip away my armor in the digital realm. Derek knew he could not access my encrypted servers. But identity theft relies on exploiting older, vulnerable administrative systems. When you share a household with someone for 2 decades, they inevitably possess the keys to your bureaucratic identity. Nancy kept a gray metal filing cabinet in her home office. Inside that cabinet were copies of every tax return, medical bill, and loan application our family had ever filed. Derek returned to his childhood bedroom, booted up his laptop, and pulled my old documents from the cabinet. He possessed my full legal name, my date of birth, my previous residential addresses, and my social security number. He did not use the local home network to launch his attack. He purchased a residential proxy service on the dark web, routing his internet connection through a series of spoofed IP addresses to mask his geographic location. He crafted an electronic ghost. Armed with my pristine credit history, Derek targeted 3 premium financial institutions known for instant automated approvals. He navigated to their application portals and inputted my social security number. He listed his own burner email address and a digital voice over IP phone number to intercept the verification protocols. The banking algorithms processed the applications. My credit score was immaculate. The risk assessment software approved the inquiries in milliseconds. Within an hour, Derek had successfully opened 3 high-tier credit cards under my name, securing a combined credit limit exceeding $45,000. He did not wait for the physical plastic cards to arrive in the mail. He requested immediate virtual card issuance, a standard feature for modern premium accounts. Once the digital card numbers populated on his screen, he initiated a rapid sequence of maximum cash advances. He funneled the funds through a third-party payment processor, converting the stolen fiat currency into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. He drained $45,000 of phantom debt in under 10 minutes. His strategy was venomous. He was not just stealing money to fund his legal defense. He was engineering a financial catastrophe designed to destroy my career. In the data security sector, employees are subjected to continuous background checks. A sudden, massive default on unsecured debt flags an employee as a severe security risk, often leading to immediate termination. Derek intended to frame me for my own financial ruin. Tuesday morning arrived. I was reviewing a client server log in my office when a priority alert triggered on my phone. It was an automated message from a major credit bureau. New account added to your credit profile. High balance reported. I opened my monitoring application. The dashboard, usually a sea of green indicators, flashed red. My credit score had plummeted overnight. 3 unknown accounts were listed, all carrying balances pushed to the absolute maximum limit. I stared at the screen. The trap had been sprung in the shadows. Derek had abandoned the crowbar and picked up a keyboard. He believed he had finally found a vulnerability I could not patch. He believed the burden of proof now rested on my shoulders, and the police would be knocking on my door to collect a debt I never authorized. He thought he had outsmarted the system. I stared at the 3 fraudulent accounts populating my credit profile on the monitor. The digital debt hovered at $45,000. Derek believed he had executed a flawless financial assassination. He assumed the burden of proof rested entirely on my shoulders. He thought I would spend months navigating bureaucratic red tape, arguing with banking customer service representatives, trying to clear my name while my professional reputation disintegrated. Before I could initiate a trace protocol on the fraudulent applications, the secure phone on my desk chimed. It was Sarah from the front reception console. Her voice lacked its usual polished warmth. It was tight, laced with a quiet urgency. "Chloe, you have visitors," Sarah whispered through the receiver. They are not clients. They bypass the visitor log. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. Send them back, I instructed. The frosted glass door of my office swung open. 2 men walked into the room. They did not wear the tailored suit standard in the financial district. They wore off the rack blazers, their postures rigid and authoritative. The gold shields clipped to their belts identified them instantly. They were detectives from the Chicago Police Department, specifically assigned to the Financial Crimes Unit. The older detective, a man with graying temples and tired eyes, introduced himself as Detective Russo. His partner, Detective Carter, possessed a sharper, more impatient demeanor. Carter held a thick manila folder under his left arm. Chloe, Detective Carter began, skipping the pleasantries and stepping directly into my personal space. We are executing a search warrant for your electronic devices. We also have a subpoena for your immediate questioning downtown. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hands in a defensive posture. I gestured toward the empty chairs across from my desk. Please, take a seat. Tell me what this is regarding. Carter did not sit. He tossed the manila folder onto the glass surface of my desk. The file slid across the smooth top, stopping near my keyboard. This is regarding a sworn affidavit filed by your mother, Nancy, at the 6th District Precinct 2 hours ago, Carter stated, his tone dripping with practiced skepticism. She provided a detailed statement claiming you utilized your professional skills to access her private banking portal. According to her sworn testimony, you drained her retirement savings accounts over the weekend. Russo stepped forward, crossing his arms. We ran a preliminary background check on your financial profile this morning. Chloe, we flagged 3 new premium credit lines opened in the last 12 hours. Those accounts were instantly maxed out for cash advances, totaling $45,000. The architecture of their trap became crystal clear. Nancy and Derek had coordinated a dual front assault. Derek manufactured the fraudulent credit debt to make it look like I was hoarding untraceable cash. Nancy filed the false police report to provide a motive. They painted a picture of a rogue cybersecurity expert liquidating assets and preparing to flee the jurisdiction. They weaponized the legal system, expecting the detectives to walk into my office, slap handcuffs on my wrists, and break my spirit. They expect a white-collar professional to crumble under the threat of incarceration. They expected tears, frantic denials, and a desperate plea for a lawyer. I looked at the folder, then looked up at Detective Carter. My mother is committing felony perjury to shield my brother from an active criminal investigation, I replied, my voice steady and cold. And my brother just committed wire fraud. You are standing in the office of a data security specialist. I do not deal in verbal denials. I deal in forensic architecture. Give me 3 minutes on my terminal. Carter reached for his handcuffs, his patience evaporating. You are not touching a computer. We are seizing the hardware. Russo held up a hand, stopping his partner. Russo had worked financial crimes long enough to recognize the difference between a cornered thief and a confident technician. Let her type Russo ordered softly. If she tries to delete a file, we arrest her on the spot for destruction of evidence. I sat back down in my ergonomic chair. I did not open a standard web browser. I launched a proprietary command line interface utilized by my firm for high-level network diagnostics. When a criminal opens a fraudulent credit card, they assume the bank only sees the information typed into the application. I explained, my fingers moving rapidly across the mechanical keyboard. They use a virtual private network or a proxy server to mask their physical location. They think they are invisible. They forget that every digital handshake leaves a biometric residue. I accessed the enterprise-level credit monitoring portal tied to my social security number. Because I held a Tier 1 security clearance, I could request the raw application packets from the credit bureaus rather than just the summary report. Lines of dense, alphanumeric code cascaded down my dark monitor. The individual who opened these accounts used a commercial proxy service based in Eastern Europe to hide their geographic footprint. I continued, narrating the process for the detectives. But they used a cheap Browser-based client. They failed to disable the web real-time communication protocols. That causes a DNS leak. The proxy drops the mask for a fraction of a millisecond during the initial server ping. I highlighted a specific string of numbers buried deep within the packet data. I executed a reverse trace command. The command line bypassed the proxy shield and grabbed the true origin Internet Protocol address. A geographic map populated on my secondary monitor. A bright blue crosshair dropped onto a residential street in the Chicago suburbs. I turned the monitor toward the detectives. The IP address resolves to a suburban broadband account registered to Richard. My father, I stated. Carter frowned, leaning over the desk to study the map. An IP address proves the application came from that house. It does not prove you were not sitting in their living room when the crime occurred. I tapped the keyboard again. You are correct. Detective. An IP address identifies the house, but a media access control address identifies the specific weapon. I opened a new window, isolating the hardware footprint left on the banking application. Every device connected to the internet possesses a unique physical signature hard-coded into its network interface card. The MAC address cannot be altered by a cheap proxy service. I extracted the alphanumeric hardware code from the fraudulent application packet. I then pulled up the access logs from my own home wireless network, dating back to the years when Derek lived with us. I ran a cross-reference algorithm. A green match confirmation flashed across the screen. The device used to steal my identity and open $45,000 in fraudulent debt is an iPhone 14, I declared, printing the unassailable data log and handing the warm paper to Russo. That specific piece of hardware is registered to Derek. He initiated the theft using the wireless router sitting in my parents' living room. The room fell silent. Russo read the printed log. He looked at the granular data, the precise timestamps, and the undeniable hardware match. The narrative Nancy had spun at the precinct unraveled in a matter of seconds. The detectives realized they had been manipulated by a grieving mother, playing the victim, sent on a fool errand to intimidate the actual target of the crime. Carter let out a low whistle, stepping back from my desk. Your mother swore under penalty of perjury that you stole her money. My mother is attempting to extort me to pay for my brother legal defense, I clarified. My brother attacked a federal narcotics canine handler over the weekend. He is out on bail. They need cash. They tried to frame me to force a settlement. Russo closed the manila folder. The suspicion in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, bureaucratic anger directed entirely at my family. The Chicago Police Department does not appreciate being used as a pawn in a domestic extortion plot. We will handle this. Chloe, Russo said, his tone shifting from adversarial to professional. We are voiding the subpoena. We are returning to the precinct to draft a new set of warrants. Nancy is facing charges for filing a false police report. Derek is facing multiple counts of aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. The detectives left my office, taking the forensic evidence with them. The threat of my professional ruin was neutralized. I had built an ironclad digital alibi, redirecting the full weight of the legal system back onto the parasites who tried to destroy me. 30 miles away, in the quiet suburbs, the hammer fell. 2 unmarked police vehicles pulled into my parents' driveway. Russo and Carter walked up to the front porch and banged on the door. Nancy answered, expecting to hear that I had been arrested and broken. Instead, Russo informed her she was under investigation for perjury. They demanded Derek step outside. Derek was sitting in the kitchen. He heard the detectives outline the wire fraud charges. He heard them mention the MAC address trace. The illusion of his digital supremacy shattered. He realized I had not just blocked his attack. I had traced the bullet back to the barrel of his gun, facing decades in a federal penitentiary for identity theft. Combined with the pending armed intrusion charges, Derek lost his grip on reality. He did not surrender. He bolted. He shoved his way out the back door, hopped the wooden fence, and sprinted into the neighboring alley before the detectives could secure the perimeter. He became a fugitive. Running from the law requires capital and shelter. Derek possessed neither. The $45,000 he had stolen was locked in a volatile cryptocurrency exchange he could no longer access without triggering a federal trace. He could not return home. His mother was under investigation, and his father was drowning in a predatory second mortgage. He was a ghost, wandering the industrial outskirts of the city, fueled by paranoia and a profound, festering hatred. In his fractured mind, the legal system was not punishing him for his crimes. He believed I was the sole architect of his misery. I was the one who abandoned the apartment. I was the one who blocked the credit card. I was the one who exposed his digital heist. When a predator realizes his traps no longer work, he abandons strategy and defaults to primal violence. Derek realized he could not outsmart me. He could not outmaneuver the corporate firewalls or the digital forensics. He decided the only way to eliminate the threat was to eliminate the target physically. He found a pawn shop on the edge of the city limits. He traded his expensive smartphone, the very device that had condemned him, for a handful of cash and a heavy, serrated hunting knife. He then purchased a cheap, prepaid burner phone from a convenience store. He needed one specific piece of intelligence to execute his final strike. He needed to find my hidden sanctuary. He reached out to the darkest corners of the city, preparing to breach the walls I had built, setting the stage for a lethal confrontation in the shadows of my own home. A fugitive running from federal wire fraud charges cannot rely on traditional infrastructure. Derek could not rent a hotel room. He could not use a credit card to purchase food. He was navigating the urban underbelly with a pocket full of cash from a pawned smartphone and a mind fractured by paranoia. But anger is a powerful catalyst for ingenuity. He realized he did not need to hack my encrypted servers to find my physical location. He only needed to locate a piece of hardware I moved through the public sphere every single day: my vehicle. Derek found a rogue skip tracer operating out of a digital forum on his cheap, prepaid burner phone for $300 in untraceable cash. The disgraced private investigator accessed a network of automated license plate readers. These cameras are mounted on traffic lights and toll booths across the Chicago metropolitan area, constantly scanning and logging passing vehicles. The tracer inputted my registration details. Within 2 hours, the system returned a geographic cluster of recent hits. My car was scanned entering a specific alleyway in the downtown financial district every evening at 6 o'clock. Derek had the coordinates of my hidden sanctuary. He arrived at the luxury high-rise shortly after midnight. The building resembled a sheer cliff of glass and steel, projecting cold indifference to the freezing street below. He did not attempt to breach the front lobby. He walked down the rear alley, observing the entrance to the underground parking garage. The heavy steel roll-up door required a cryptographic key fob for entry. Derek waited in the shadows behind a commercial dumpster, pulling the collar of his hooded sweatshirt up against the biting wind. At 1 a.m, a black SUV turned into the alley and approached the garage. The driver scanned their badge. The steel door rumbled upward. As the SUV rolled down the concrete ramp, Derek slipped out from the shadows and sprinted through the descending opening, sliding under the heavy metal curtain just seconds before it crashed shut. He was inside the perimeter. The subterranean garage was vast, illuminated by rows of harsh fluorescent lights. The air smelled of cold concrete and motor oil. Derek walked silently between the parked luxury sedans and sports cars, scanning the license plates. He gripped the heavy, serrated hunting knife in his coat pocket. He had abandoned the idea of a digital attack. He had abandoned the idea of extorting cash. He wanted to inflict fatal, irreversible damage. He located my compact vehicle, parked in a premium reserved space near the elevator bank. His strategy was primitive but lethal. Modern vehicles rely on pressurized hydraulic fluid to operate the braking system. The rubber brake hoses run along the undercarriage, exposed near the wheel wells. If he severed those lines, the fluid would slowly drain. The next time I drove onto the icy Chicago expressways and attempted to decelerate at high speed, the brake pedal would sink straight to the floorboards. The resulting crash would look like a tragic winter accident. Derek dropped to his knees on the cold concrete. He pulled the serrated blade from his pocket. He laid flat on his back and began to inch his way under the rear chassis of my car, navigating the tight clearance. He believed he was operating in a blind spot. He assumed the cameras mounted on the concrete pillars were passive recording devices, monitored by an underpaid security guard asleep at a desk. He did not understand the architecture of the fortress Marcus had selected. The property management firm did not rely on human observation for overnight security. The garage was equipped with an autonomous behavioral recognition network. The cameras were optical sensors feeding data directly into a localized artificial intelligence server. The software utilized spatial mapping to monitor the environment. It understood the baseline parameters of a parking garage. Cars move in designated lanes. Pedestrians walk upright from their vehicles to the elevators. The moment Derek's body dropped to the floor and he began crawling under a parked vehicle, his physical geometry violated the core algorithms. The AI did not wait for a human to review the footage. It registered a critical anomaly indicating active sabotage or theft. The countermeasure deployed in less than 2 seconds. Derek had just located the rubber brake line. He raised his knife. A deafening, high-decibel acoustic alarm ruptured the silence of the underground vault. The sound was engineered to cause immediate disorientation. Simultaneous with the siren, a network of red strobe lights mounted along the ceiling began flashing at a rapid frequency, flooding the gray concrete with blinding, disorienting bursts of crimson light. Derek slammed his head against the steel undercarriage in shock. The knife slipped from his fingers, clattering out of reach. He scrambled out from under the chassis, gasping for air. His hands pressed over his ears to block the piercing alarm. He looked toward the entry ramp, planning to sprint back out into the alley. He watched in horror as the building locked itself down. Heavy hydraulic steel bollards shot up from the concrete floor across the exit lanes. Thick metal riot grills dropped over the ventilation bays. The automated perimeter sealed the garage into an inescapable steel box. Through the red flashing lights, Derek saw the elevator doors at the far end of the facility slide open. 3 security officers stepped out, holding heavy flashlights and drawing their tactical batons. They spotted him instantly. Panic consumed his rational thought. He abandoned the hunting knife on the floor. He ran away from the guards, sprinting toward the rear corner of the garage where the trash compaction units were housed. The guards shouted commands, their boots echoing loudly over the wailing siren. Derek reached a dead end. The walls were solid concrete. The only opening was a narrow, heavy-gauge steel mesh door securing the building garbage chute and exhaust ventilation shaft. He grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from a nearby mounting bracket. Fueled by adrenaline and raw terror, he swung the red cylinder with all his might, smashing it into the locking mechanism of the mesh door. The cheap metal latch snapped. Derek ripped the door open and threw himself into the dark, narrow shaft. He clawed his way up the service ladder, his clothes tearing against the jagged metal edges, his hands bleeding. He reached the street-level exhaust louver, kicked the aluminum grates outward, and tumbled onto the snowy pavement of a side street. He picked himself up and vanished into the freezing night, escaping capture by a fraction of a second. My bedroom phone rang 10 minutes later. It was the head of building security. He informed me that the autonomous defense system had intercepted an active sabotage attempt on my vehicle. He requested my presence in the security hub. I dressed quickly and took the elevator down to the ground floor. I entered the surveillance room, a dark space lined with glowing monitors. The security chief, a stern former military officer, pulled up the recorded footage. I watched my brother slide under my car. I watched the system engage. I watched him panic and flee like a cornered animal. "He left his knife under your chassis," the chief stated, pointing to the screen. "The police are already on their way to process the weapon for fingerprints. But that is not the only thing he left behind." The chief reached into an evidence bag resting on his desk and pulled out a cheap, plastic smartphone. When he broke through the mesh door in the compaction room, he dropped this, the chief explained. handing the device to me. It is a prepaid burner. No biometric lock. No passcode. The screen was still active when my guards recovered it from the floor of the shaft. I looked at the cheap phone in my hand. A criminal abandoning a burner phone is a common occurrence. They use them for disposable communication. But Derek was not a sophisticated operative. He was sloppy. In his rush to escape the dropping steel barricades, he had left the gateway to his operation wide open. I tapped the screen to wake the device. The interface was generic, stripped of all standard commercial applications. There were no social media icons. There were no banking apps. The screen displayed a single, active application. It was an encrypted messaging protocol, heavily favored by black market vendors. I expected to find angry text messages directed at me, or perhaps communications with his criminal defense attorney. Instead, I stared at a sprawling, highly organized directory of digital illicit trade. I opened the primary message thread. The sender was listed only under an alphanumeric handle. The content of the messages stripped the air from my lungs. Derek had not just stolen my identity to ruin my credit score. The texts revealed a structured, ongoing dialogue detailing the purchase and sale of stolen Social Security numbers, forged driver licenses, and compromised corporate credentials. He was exchanging batch files of synthetic identities for cryptocurrency payouts. I scrolled higher up the thread, my eyes scanning the chilling logistics. The alphanumeric sender was demanding an update on a specific delivery. The text read, 50,000 in high-end electronics ordered on the ghost cards. Did the shipment clear the drop address? Derek response, sent 3 days ago. Confirmed the delivery. Shipment cleared. Packages are sitting in the basement. I looked at the designated drop address he had provided to the sender. It was not an abandoned warehouse. It was not a commercial post office box. It was the exact residential address of my parents' suburban home. The secret unspooled before me with horrifying clarity. Derek was not an isolated thief running a petty scam. He was a low-level mule operating within a sprawling, highly dangerous synthetic identity fraud syndicate. He was using the internet to purchase luxury goods with stolen credit profiles. Because he could not receive stolen merchandise at a traceable location, he had turned Nancy and Richard House into a criminal logistics hub. He was receiving tens of thousands of dollars in illicit cargo directly to their doorstep. I stared at the screen, reading the final, unread message sent by the syndicate handler just hours before Derek attempted to sabotage my car. The tone of the message was no longer transactional. It was a lethal mandate. We saw the police activity at the drop address today. You missed the crypto transfer deadline. You lost the merchandise. You owe us $50,000 by tomorrow night. We know where your parents sleep. Fix it, or we collect it in blood. The conflict had fundamentally mutated. My brother had dragged my parents into the crosshairs of an organized criminal network. The people hunting him were not constrained by the law. They were constrained only by their bottom line. The syndicate was moving in to collect their debt, and the quiet suburban house I grew up in was about to become a war zone. I did not take the abandoned device back to my apartment. An unsecured smartphone linked to an active criminal enterprise is a digital biohazard. You do not bring it into your sanctuary. I placed the plastic phone into a radio frequency shielding bag provided by the building security chief, walked out to my vehicle, and drove directly to the corporate headquarters of my data security firm. The building was practically empty at 3 a.m. I bypassed the main elevators and swiped my biometric credential at a secure stairwell, descending into the subterranean levels. My firm maintains an isolated digital forensics laboratory in the basement. The room is a Faraday cage, encased in copper mesh to block all incoming and outgoing cellular signals. It is a sterile environment designed specifically to dissect compromised hardware without tipping off the attackers. I unlocked the heavy steel door and turned on the overhead surgical lights. The room hummed with the sound of cooling units and idle servers. I pulled up a chair at a stainless steel workbench and unsealed the evidence bag. I dialed Marcus on my encrypted line. I gave him a 2-sentence summary of the garage breach and the recovered hardware. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He promised to be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I connected the cheap plastic phone to a forensic imaging terminal. The screen on the burner was unlocked, but scrolling through a chat interface manually is inefficient and risks altering the metadata. I executed a hard drive duplication protocol. The imaging software bypassed the user interface, reading the raw flash memory of the device and creating a perfect bit-for-bit clone on my secure server. Marcus arrived just as the progress bar hit 100%. He wore a dark trench coat over his gym clothes, having clearly rolled out of bed the moment I called. He stepped into the cold laboratory, surveyed the extraction setup, and pulled a stool up next to my workstation. He lost his temper and rushed the garage, Marcus deduced, his eyes scanning the cracked screen of the physical phone resting on the metal table. He triggered the autonomous defense grid, I confirmed. He dropped the hardware while escaping through the trash chute. I turned my monitor toward Marcus. The cloning process had mapped the entire directory structure of the phone. I bypassed the standard application folders and opened the cache database for the encrypted messaging client. The initial text I had read in the security room was only the surface of a deep, dark ocean. When you parse the SQLite database of a messaging application, you recover more than just the visible texts. You recover the deleted logs, the archived transaction receipts, and the geolocation tags embedded in the image files. The screen populated with hundreds of rows of data. This is not a local burglary ring, I stated, highlighting a dense cluster of spreadsheets buried within the file system. Derek is not just stealing random credit cards. He is an operative in a synthetic identity network. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the steel counter. He understood real estate and physical security, but the granular mechanics of digital fraud were my domain. He asked me to translate the ledger. Standard identity theft involves stealing a real person wallet and using their card until the bank blocks it. I explained, pointing to the columns of alphanumeric data. Synthetic fraud is an entirely different architecture. These syndicates operate like digital farmers. They steal a legitimate social security number, usually belonging to a child or a deceased individual. Then, they attach a completely fabricated name, a fake date of birth, and a synthetic credit history to that authentic number. I scrolled down the list. There were over 400 synthetic profiles logged in Derek Cache. They nurture these fake profiles for years. I continued. They apply for small loans, pay them off on time, and build immaculate credit scores. The banks trust the algorithm. Once the credit limit peaks at $50,000 or $100,000, the syndicate executes a bust-out. They max out every single card simultaneously, converting the credit into untraceable assets like cryptocurrency, gold bullion, or high-end electronics. Then they abandon the synthetic ghost. Marcus studied the ledger. The math was staggering. 400 profiles multiplied by a $50,000 credit limit equated to a $20 million criminal enterprise. Where does your brother fit into a $20 million machine? Marcus asked, identifying the primary discrepancy. He lacks the discipline to build a credit profile. He cannot even hold a job at a retail store. I opened the shipping manifest, recovered from the message attachments. He is not the architect, I replied. He is the mule. I clicked on a sequence of PDF receipts. The documents detailed commercial freight deliveries, pallets of high-end graphics cards used for crypto mining, crates of premium smartphones, boxes of designer watches. The syndicate was using the synthetic credit cards to purchase liquid, high-value merchandise online. But you cannot ship stolen goods to a phantom address. The logistics require a physical destination. I highlighted the delivery coordinates on every single manifest. They needed a quiet, unassuming location to receive the freight, I said, the cold reality settling over the sterile laboratory, a place that does not draw law enforcement attention. A middle-class residential address. Marcus read the street name on the screen. The address belonged to Nancy and Richard. Your parents' house, Marcus observed, his voice dropping an octave. He turned their suburban property into a black market fulfillment center. The puzzle pieces locked together with terrifying precision. Derek had been living at home under the guise of searching for employment. In reality, he was managing the ground logistics for a transnational crime ring. Nancy and Richard likely believed the endless stream of FedEx and UPS trucks pulling up to their driveway were part of a legitimate e-commerce startup he kept bragging about. They signed for the packages. They stacked the boxes in their basement. They enabled his criminal enterprise, blinded by their desperate desire to see him succeed. But the logistics chain had snapped. I pulled up the final, unread communication thread from the Syndicate handler. The message I had seen in the garage was part of a larger, more ominous sequence. The handler did not just send a threat. They sent photographic surveillance. I opened a compressed image file attached to the thread. The picture was taken from across the street of my parents' house. It showed Detective Russo and Detective Carter standing on the front porch, knocking on the door. The Syndicate employs local spotters to monitor their drop houses. I explained, analyzing the angle of the photograph. When the police showed up yesterday afternoon to investigate my mother perjury and Derek wire fraud, the spotter took this picture and flagged the address as compromised. Marcus understood the street-level implications immediately. In the eyes of the cartel, a police visit means the location is burned. It means the authorities are either cataloging the stolen merchandise or preparing a raid. Exactly, I agreed. The Syndicate assumes the $50,000 in electronics sitting in that basement is lost. They do not care about police warrants. They operate on a rigid balance sheet. Derek lost their cargo. The debt transferred directly to his head. We sat in silence, processing the escalation. The enemies hunting my brother were no longer restricted by judicial bureaucracy. They did not require subpoenas or search warrants. They were a sophisticated, heavily armed financial cartel that utilized violence as a standard collection protocol. And Derek was currently a fugitive. He had pawned his phone. He had abandoned his burner. He was cut off from the network, wandering the freezing city streets, unable to answer the demands of his handlers. When a mule vanishes, the cartel does not write off the loss, Marcus noted, his tactical mind mapping the inevitable outcome. They liquidate the nearest available asset to recoup the deficit. I looked back at the surveillance photo of the quiet suburban house, the manicured lawn, the familiar oak door. The structure where I had spent a suffocating childhood was now marked for destruction. They know where your parents sleep, Marcus recited, quoting the final text message. Your brother cannot pay the debt. He is going to let the Syndicate collect it from them. I closed the imaging software and disconnected the physical device. The digital forensics had provided a flawless map of the impending collision. Nancy and Richard had spent the last week actively trying to destroy my career to protect their son. They had lied to the police. They had filed false reports. They had planted a tracking device on my coat. They believed they were fighting a righteous war against an ungrateful daughter. They had no idea a Syndicate hit squad was currently drawing a target on their front door. Derek knew, though. He knew the deadline was approaching. He knew the people he worked for would bypass him and extract the $50,000 directly from the property title of the drop house. Instead of turning himself in to the authorities for protection, he was going to double down. I packed my laptop into my briefcase. The laboratory felt colder than usual. He is going to surface soon, I predicted, walking toward the heavy steel door. He has no money, no shelter, and a bounty on his head. He cannot run forever. He is going to contact them. Marcus fell in step beside me. He will not call them to confess, Marcus warned. He will call them to extract the capital he needs to flee the country. He is going to bleed them dry before the cartel even arrives. We exited the subterranean level and stepped into the elevator. The digital war was transitioning back into the physical realm. Derek was preparing to execute his final, most devastating manipulation, turning his own parents into financial human shields. A fugitive cornered by a transnational crime syndicate does not experience a sudden moral awakening. When the escape routes vanish and the financial resources run dry, a predator relies on their most practiced survival mechanism. They manipulate the weakest targets in their immediate vicinity. Derek could not outrun the cartel operatives hunting him, and he could not hack my secure digital perimeter. He required a substantial injection of untraceable capital to purchase a forged passport and flee across the southern border. He turned his attention back to the only two people on Earth who still viewed him as a victim. At 4 a.m, while Marcus and I were dissecting his digital footprint in the corporate laboratory, Derek crept through the unlit backyard of my parents' suburban home. He bypassed the front door, aware that cartel spotters might be watching the street. He used his old key to unlock the kitchen entrance. Nancy and Richard were sitting at the dining table, surrounded by the remnants of a sleepless night. The visit from the Chicago police detectives had shattered their domestic illusion. They were staring at a printed copy of the search warrant left by Detective Russo. Derek walked into the kitchen. He did not apologize for bringing federal wire fraud charges to their doorstep. He did not explain the pallets of stolen merchandise stacked in their basement. He executed a psychological masterclass in weaponized guilt. He collapsed onto the floor, clutching his stitched forearm, and began to weep. Nancy rushed to his side, her maternal instincts overriding any logical assessment of the situation. She demanded to know why the police were accusing him of stealing $45,000. She demanded to know why detectives were treating their home like a crime scene. Derek looked up at them, tears streaming down his face, and delivered a fabricated narrative designed to absolve himself and condemn me. He told them the truth about the danger, but he inverted the architect. He confessed that a violent criminal organization was targeting the family. He admitted the house was being watched by armed men who intended to collect a $50,000 debt. But he swore he was not the mastermind. He pointed the finger directly at my corporate office. Derek claimed I was living a double life. He told Nancy and Richard that my high-paying cybersecurity career was a front. He fabricated a story where I utilized my technical expertise to borrow heavy capital from an underworld syndicate to fund my luxury high-rise apartment and designer wardrobe. According to his twisted script, the cartel discovered I could not repay the loan. To save myself, I had redirected the syndicate wrath onto him. He convinced our parents that the stolen credit cards, the shipping manifests, and the police investigations were all digital smokescreens I engineered to frame him and sacrifice the family. Cognitive dissonance is a powerful force. Nancy and Richard faced a brutal choice. They could accept the empirical evidence presented by law enforcement, which proved their son was a felon who used their home to fence stolen goods. Or they could believe a narrative where their independent, estranged daughter was a ruthless sociopath, and their son was a tragic hero trying to protect them. They chose the lie. It protected their ego. It justified their long-standing resentment toward my success. The immediate threat, however, remained real. Derek convinced them that the cartel operatives would burn the house down by midnight if a $100,000 ransom was not paid. He needed $50,000 to satisfy the syndicate debt and another $50,000 to secure a new identity and relocate. Traditional banks require 30 days to process a home equity line of credit. They mandate property appraisals, income verification, and extensive underwriting. A family facing an imminent cartel execution cannot wait a month. Richard grabbed his coat and the original paper deed to their house. As soon as the sun rose, he drove to a strip mall on the desolate edge of the county lines. He walked into the office of a predatory hard money lender. These financial entities operate in the murky gray area of the law. They do not care about credit scores or employment history. They care about hard collateral. The lender sat behind a cheap laminate desk, reviewing the property deed. The house was paid off. A lifetime of equity sitting on a single sheet of paper. Richard requested a $100,000 immediate wire transfer. The lender slid a contract across the table. The terms were brutal. An exorbitant interest rate, hidden origination fees, and a 90-day repayment window. If Richard defaulted by a single hour, The lending firm possessed the legal right to foreclose on the property and seize the home without a judicial hearing. Richard did not read the fine print. He picked up a pen and signed his name, pledging the roof over his head to fund a phantom ransom. The lender stamped the document and initiated a wire transfer into Richard's primary checking account. They had the money, but greed is an insatiable engine. Nancy returned to this house and watched the six-figure sum populate on her banking application. The fear of the cartel subsidized, replaced by a searing, vindictive anger directed at me. She believed I had caused this trauma. She believed I had forced her husband to sign away their home. She decided $100,000 was not enough to balance the scales. Thursday morning arrived. I was sitting at my desk in the financial district, reviewing the forensic logs Marcus and I had compiled overnight. The secure internal line on my console chimed. The caller identification displayed the front reception desk. Sarah spoke in a hushed tone. "Chloe, your mother is online too. She bypassed the cell block by calling the corporate switchboard. She says it is a legal emergency." I instructed Sarah to route the call to my headset. I tapped a key on my terminal, activating a compliant audio recording protocol, standard for all incoming external calls on my security tier. I did not offer a greeting. I waited for her to speak. Nancy did not scream this time. Her voice was eerily calm, carrying the triumphant edge of a predator who believes they have trapped their prey. "We know the truth, Chloe," Nancy stated, her tone dripping with venom. "Derek told us everything. We know you borrowed money from those animals. We know you set up the fake credit cards to frame your brother and distract the police." I stared at the Chicago skyline through my office window. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Derek had successfully manipulated them into acting as his defense attorneys. "He is lying to you," I replied, my voice steady. The police tracked the hardware address directly to his phone. He is a mule for a synthetic fraud ring. If he is in the house, you need to call the authorities. The people he works for are dangerous. Do not play your corporate mind games with me," Nancy snapped, discarding my warning. "Your father just mortgaged our home to save Derek's life. We had to borrow $100,000 from a private firm to pay off the thugs you sent to our doorstep. You ruined our financial security, and now you are going to repair it." She paused, allowing the silence to amplify her next demand. "You maintain a corporate retirement account," Nancy continued, demonstrating an unsettling knowledge of my financial structure. "I know your firm matches contributions. You have at least $150,000 sitting in that fund. You are going to liquidate it today? You will wire the penalty-free balance directly into my checking account before the banks close at 5:00. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. "You are demanding I empty my retirement savings to pay off a predatory loan Richard signed. I am demanding restitution for the damage you caused," she corrected, her voice hardening. "And if you refuse, you will lose a lot more than your savings. You will lose your freedom." The pivot from financial demand to active extortion was seamless. Nancy revealed the weapon Derek had forged during his brief stay at the house. "While you were sleeping in your luxury apartment, Derek spent the night on his laptop," Nancy explained, a cruel satisfaction evident in her cadence. "He compiled a digital archive onto a flash drive. He exported chat logs, email threads, and banking transfers. He knows how you people work. He altered the routing data. Every single illegal transaction, every fake profile, and every communication with that cartel now points directly to your personal IP address and your corporate email server." A cold realization washed over me. Derek was an incompetent burglar, but he understood the basics of digital manipulation. He had spent the night spoofing headers and fabricating a counterfeit paper trails. He designed a digital dossier that painted me as the architect of the $20 million syndicate. "I have the flash drive sitting in my purse," Nancy threatened. "If the money is not in my account by 5:00, I am driving straight to the federal building. I will hand this drive to a prosecutor. I will tell them you orchestrated the entire fraud ring and tried to use your own brother as a scapegoat. Your firm will fire you. The government will strip your security clearance. You will spend the next 20 years in a federal prison. The parameters of the conflict had shifted permanently. This was no longer a toxic family dispute over a stolen lockbox. This was a coordinated conspiracy to commit federal extortion, backed by forged evidence designed to trigger a malicious prosecution. They were willing to destroy my entire existence to fund Derek's escape. "Are you absolutely certain this is the path you want to take?" I asked, offering her one final, fleeting chance to step back from the edge. "Wire the money." "Chloe," Nancy commanded, "or I will bury you." The line went dead. I removed my headset and placed it onto the desk. The audio file of her extortion demand finished processing, saving directly onto my encrypted local server. I sat in the quiet office, the hum of the ventilation system the only sound in the room. They had chosen their allegiance. They had mortgaged their home to finance a fugitive, and they planned to cannibalize my future to cover the deficit. Nancy believed she held the ultimate leverage. She believed the threat of a federal investigation would force my compliance. She did not understand the cardinal rule of cybersecurity. You never launch an offensive strike against an opponent who controls the underlying infrastructure. I opened a new terminal window on my monitor. The time for defensive maneuvers and evasion tactics was over. They wanted to weaponize the financial system against me. I prepared to show them what a true digital embargo looks like, ready to cut the oxygen lines to their bank accounts before they could spend a single dollar of that blood money. I saved the audio file of my mother attempting to extort my retirement fund. I did not shed a tear over the fractured remains of my family. Tears require emotional investment, and my investment in their well-being had officially reached a zero balance. Nancy believed she possessed the upper hand because she held a forged digital dossier. She failed to understand that forged data is fragile. It crumbles under the weight of verifiable, forensic truth. I opened a secure browser window on my primary terminal. The defense protocol began with fortifying my own perimeter. I navigated to the portals of the 3 major credit bureaus. I initiated a permanent, statutory security freeze on my social security number. The automated systems locked my profile within seconds. Derek could no longer weaponize my identity. My financial armor was sealed. Next, I transitioned from defense to a targeted offensive strike. I compiled the evidence Marcus and I had extracted from the abandoned burner phone. I bundled the shipping manifests containing my parents' home address, the cryptographic ledgers detailing the synthetic identity purchases, and the threatening messages sent by the cartel handler. I appended the audio recording of Nancy explicit extortion demand. I did not draft a lengthy, emotional plea. I wrote a concise, objective summary of an active transnational wire fraud and money laundering conspiracy operating out of a residential drop house. I routed my connection through a series of anonymized virtual private networks, masking my origin point. I uploaded the encrypted dossier directly to the cybercrime tip portal maintained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I did not stop there. The federal bureaucracy moves methodically, often taking days to assign a field agent to a new dossier. I needed an immediate, systemic disruption. I targeted the automated compliance algorithms governing the banking sector. I utilized my corporate credentials to file a formal suspicious activity report regarding the $100,000 hard money loan Richard had just secured. Financial institutions operate under strict anti-money laundering regulations. When a 6-figure sum originates from a predatory lender and lands in a standard suburban checking account, it generates a low-level alert. When that same account is suddenly flagged by a certified data security specialist for facilitating a cartel logistics network, the low-level alert becomes a critical compliance violation. I hit submit on the report. The digital infrastructure took over 30 miles away. Richard sat in his home office, staring at his laptop screen. The $100,000 rested in his checking account. He opened a transfer window, intending to wire $50,000 to a specified offshore routing number Derek had provided, hoping to buy his son a reprieve from the Syndicate. Richard typed in the routing details. He entered the amount. He clicked authorize. The banking interface lagged for a fraction of a second. Instead of displaying a confirmation receipt, the screen flashed a stark red warning banner. Error code 89. Account restricted. Please contact your branch administrator. Richard frowned. He picked up his phone and dialed the customer service number on the back of his debit card. After 10 minutes on hold, a representative answered. The agent pulled up his profile. The customer service worker did not offer apologies or troubleshooting steps. Sir, your accounts have been placed under a mandatory administrative hold, the agent recited, reading from a rigid compliance script. We are unable to process any outbound transfers, withdrawals, or debit transactions at this time. Richard's voice rose, panic threading through his words. What do you mean, a hold? I have $100,000 sitting right there. I need to send a wire today. It is an emergency. I understand your frustration. Sir! But the restriction was initiated by our Risk Management Division in accordance with federal anti-money laundering statutes. The agent explained coldly. We cannot lift the freeze until the internal investigation concludes. Have a good afternoon. The line disconnected. Richard stared at the dead phone. He possessed $100,000 of high-interest debt, and he could not access a single penny. The predatory lender was already calculating daily interest, and the principal was trapped in a frozen digital vault. The financial oxygen line I had severed was now officially flatlining. Nancy walked into the home office, expecting to see a confirmation receipt for the cartel payment. She took one look at her husband, pale, terrified face, and realized their leverage had evaporated. The extortion plot had failed. They had mortgaged their shelter for an illusion. The sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across the suburban neighborhood. The deadline Derek had communicated was rapidly approaching. The Syndicate does not monitor bank accounts. They do not care about compliance freezes or administrative errors. They operate on a binary code of payment or punishment. When the evening rolled in and the offshore wire transfer failed to materialize, the handlers dispatched their collection team. At 9 o'clock, Nancy was pacing the length of the living room, clutching her phone, desperate for Derek to call with a backup plan. Richard sat on the sofa, his head in his hands, paralyzed by the financial ruin he had signed his name to. The quiet rhythm of the suburban street was shattered by the roar of heavy engines. Two dark, unwashed SUVs pulled up to the curb, idling menacingly in front of the manicured lawn. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the front facade of the house. Nancy froze in the center of the living room. She peered through the sheer curtains. 4 men stepped out of the vehicles. They did not wear ski masks. They did not try to hide. They moved with the casual, terrifying confidence of predators operating in familiar territory. One of the men walked up the driveway. He carried a heavy, jagged landscaping brick retrieved from a nearby garden bed. He did not shout a warning. He did not demand entry. He threw the brick with brutal force. The heavy stone crashed through the large picture window of the living room. The sound of shattering glass was deafening. Shards of sharp, jagged glass exploded inward, raining down over the carpet and the sofa where Richard sat. The cold night air rushed into the warm house, carrying the sharp scent of exhaust fumes. Nancy screamed, dropping to her knees, covering her head as the glass settled around her. Richard scrambled backward, falling off the sofa, his hands raised defensively. Outside, another man walked along the side of the garage. The metallic rattle of a spray paint can echoed over the idling engines. He sprayed a thick, crimson line of paint across the white siding. The message was brief, stark, and undeniable. Time is up. The men did not enter the house. They did not need to. The psychological siege had been established. They returned to their vehicles, slammed the doors, and drove away, leaving the shattered window as a promise of the violence to come. Nancy knelt on the floor, surrounded by the ruined pieces of her comfortable life. The wind howled through the broken window frame. The realization of her true position finally crushed her ego. She had tried to outsmart a cybersecurity expert, and she had tried to shield a criminal. She had lost on both fronts, her hands trembling violently. Nancy picked up her smartphone from the carpet. The arrogance was gone. The venomous demands were erased. She was a terrified woman, sitting in a freezing room. Hunted by a cartel her son had invited to dinner. She dialed my number. I was sitting in my secure, high-rise apartment, watching a documentary on my television. My phone rested on the glass coffee table. The screen illuminated, displaying Nancy's name. I had temporarily unblocked her number, anticipating the fallout of the asset freeze. I did not reach for the device. I sat on my plush sofa, watching the incoming call notification pulse. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of the line. I knew she was crying. I knew she was ready to beg for a financial rescue, ready to promise anything to make the terror stop. She wanted me to use my corporate resources to unfreeze the bank accounts. She wanted me to hire private security to guard their shattered window. I let the phone ring. The sound filled my living room, a steady, rhythmic chime of desperation. I picked up a glass of sparkling water, took a slow sip, and watched the call roll into my voicemail. The moment the ringing stopped, I accessed my carrier settings and engaged a permanent, network-level block on both of my parents' phone numbers. The digital wall was reinforced with steel. Their problems were their own. They had built their own cage, and I was throwing away the key. But a cornered rat does not simply accept starvation. Derek was still navigating the urban shadows. He was cut off from his syndicate handlers, and he knew his parents were likely under siege. He realized the home equity loan had failed. He realized the extortion plot had backfired. He had $50,000 on his head, no passport, and no shelter. He concluded that digital warfare was useless. Extortion was ineffective. The only remaining asset he could leverage was my physical person. If he could not hack my bank accounts from afar, he would extract the access codes by force. Derek gripped the heavy steel wrench he had stolen from a construction site earlier that evening. He knew my corporate schedule. He knew I parked in an executive garage. The building AI had thwarted him once, but he learned from his failure. He was not going to sneak under my car in the middle of the night. He was going to wait for the sun to rise. He was going to ambush me in the harsh light of day, turning a corporate parking lot into a battleground. Friday morning brought a harsh, biting chill to the Chicago financial district. A fugitive deprived of sleep, capital, and shelter rapidly sheds the veneer of civilization. Derek had spent the night navigating the freezing urban grid, dodging local patrol cars and paranoid about every dark SUV that slowed down near him. The cartel was hunting him. The police were searching for him. The home equity funds were frozen behind an impenetrable compliance wall. His intricate web of digital fraud had collapsed, leaving him with a singular, primal objective. He needed access to my biometric data. He needed my phone, my face, and my fingerprints to bypass the corporate firewalls and drain my retirement accounts. He could not achieve that through social engineering. He required blunt force. He procured a heavy, forged steel pipe wrench from a commercial construction dumpster. The tool was designed to tighten industrial plumbing. In the hands of a cornered predator, it was a lethal bludgeon. Derek knew the layout of my corporate headquarters. He knew the executive parking structure was located adjacent to the main glass tower, connected by an open-air concrete walkway. Security at the vehicle entrance was tight, but pedestrian access from the alleyway relied on a simple turnstile. Derek waited until a delivery courier pushed through the gate with a hand truck. Slipping through the gap before the metal bars locked into place, he positioned himself behind a thick concrete pillar near my designated parking space. He pulled the hood of his dark sweatshirt over his head. He gripped the steel wrench, his knuckles white against the cold metal. He waited in the shadows. I arrived at 8:15. I navigated my compact vehicle up the concrete ramp and pulled into my reserved spot. The engine cut off, leaving the cavernous garage echoing with the distant sounds of city traffic. I gathered my leather briefcase from the passenger seat, pushed the door open, and stepped onto the cold pavement. I did not know my brother was standing 15 feet away. I did not know he had crossed the threshold from financial theft to attempted murder. But I was not unprotected. Marcus understands the predictable nature of escalating threats. When the Syndicate spotters photographed my parents' home, he recognized the tactical shift. A desperate man will always return to his primary target. Marcus had initiated a shadow protocol without alerting me to the specifics. He had parked his own vehicle on the upper level of the structure 20 minutes before my arrival. He was standing in the stairwell, out of sight, monitoring my transit across the concrete floor. I locked my car doors and turned toward the pedestrian walkway. Derek stepped out from behind the pillar. He did not look like the arrogant sibling who used to raid my refrigerator. His face was pale, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, radiating a feral, unhinged energy. He did not shout my name. He did not demand a wire transfer. He closed the distance between us with terrifying speed, raising the heavy steel wrench high above his shoulder. His intention was clear. He aimed for the side of my head, planning to incapacitate me, drag me into the stairwell, and force my compliance through physical trauma. I froze, my mind processing the lethal threat a fraction of a second too late. The heavy metal tool began its downward arc. A shadow blurred into my peripheral vision. Marcus did not yell to announce his presence. Yelling wastes oxygen and surrenders the element of surprise. He launched himself from the exit door of the stairwell, crossing the concrete with explosive kinetic momentum. Before the steel wrench could reach my skull, Marcus intercepted the strike. He drove his left forearm into Derek's tricep, blocking the downward trajectory of the weapon. The impact echoed sharply in the quiet garage. Simultaneously, Marcus stepped into Derek's center of gravity, wrapping his right arm around my brother's neck and shoulder in a fluid, practiced tactical takedown. Marcus twisted his hips and used Derek's own forward momentum against him. My brother's feet left the pavement. He crashed hard onto the unforgiving concrete floor. The air rushed out of his lungs in a sharp gasp. The heavy pipe wrench slipped from his grip, skittering across the garage and clanging against a concrete parking block. The physical engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. It was a masterclass in controlled, defensive neutralization. Marcus dropped his weight onto Derek's chest, pinning him to the floor. He grabbed Derek's right wrist, twisting the arm into a joint lock to ensure the threat remained immobilized. "Stay down," Marcus commanded, his voice cold and steady, devoid of the panic that usually accompanies a physical assault. But a cornered animal does not adhere to logic. Derek was drowning in adrenaline and the sheer terror of his impending capture. He realized he was pinned. He realized his final extortion attempt had failed. The cartel was waiting for him, and now he was seconds away from being handed over to the police. Derek abandoned all restraint. He twisted his torso wildly, thrashing against the concrete. When he realized he could not break the joint lock, he lunged forward with his head. He opened his mouth and sank his teeth directly into Marcus' exposed forearm. It was a barbaric, desperate maneuver. Marcus grimaced, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. But he did not release his hold immediately. He used his free hand to strike a pressure point near Derek's jawline, forcing the jaw muscles to unhinge. Derek released the bite, spitting blood onto the gray concrete. The momentary release of pressure provided the sliver of space my brother needed. He scrambled backward, his boots slipping on the pavement. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his bruised shoulder. He looked at me, then at the blood dripping from Marcus' arm. The realization of his actions seemed to register for a fleeting second. He turned and ran. Derek sprinted toward a rusted, unregistered sedan he had illegally parked near the exit lane. He threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed the ignition. The engine roared to life. He threw the car into gear and accelerated blindly toward the exit. He did not wait for the automated wooden barrier to lift. The sedan smashed through the gate, splintering the wood, and merged recklessly into the morning traffic, disappearing into the maze of the city. I stood in the quiet garage, my pulse drumming a frantic rhythm in my ears. I looked down at the concrete. A small pool of blood marked the exact spot where the struggle had occurred. I rushed toward Marcus, He was standing up, examining his forearm. The fabric of his dress shirt was torn, and a deep, jagged puncture wound marred his skin. I pulled a clean handkerchief from my briefcase and pressed it tightly against the laceration to slow the bleeding. "We need to get you to an emergency room," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my system. Marcus applied pressure to the cloth, his expression remarkably calm. "The hospital can wait 10 minutes," he replied, looking up at the ceiling. "We need to secure the digital asset first." He pointed toward a sleek, black dome mounted on the concrete pillar directly above us. The corporate executive garage did not utilize standard, grainy security feeds. My firm handled sensitive government contracts, and our physical perimeter was monitored by high-definition, 4,000-pixel optical sensors. The camera possessed a direct, unobstructed angle of the entire altercation. We walked into the building and bypassed the medical station, heading straight for the central security hub. David, the director of physical security, was already pulling the footage from the server. We stood in front of the large monitor and watched the replay. The video quality was clinical. It captured Derek's face in crystal clear resolution as he raised the steel wrench. It captured the lethal intent in his eyes. It documented Marcus' flawless intervention, the struggle on the floor, and the feral bite that drew blood. Finally, it captured the license plate of the rusted sedan as Derek smashed through the exit barrier. "This is no longer a white-collar investigation," David noted, his arms crossed as the footage looped. I agreed. White-collar crimes involve spreadsheets, proxy servers, and subpoena requests. They move slowly through the judicial system. Physical violence triggers an entirely different legal mechanism. I requested an encrypted copy of the raw video file. I bypassed the local precinct and sent the footage directly to Detective Russo and Detective Carter at the Financial Crimes Unit, appending a brief summary of the unprovoked attack. The response from law enforcement was immediate and severe. When a suspect under active investigation for federal wire fraud escalates to premeditated physical violence against a civilian, the priority level skyrockets. The detectives handed the high-definition footage to the district attorney. Within 1 hour, a judge signed an emergency state-level arrest warrant. The charges were staggering. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, fleeing the scene of a crime, resisting apprehension. Derek was no longer a person of interest in a financial scam. He was officially classified as a violent, armed fugitive. His photograph, extracted from the crisp security footage, was broadcast to every patrol car in the Chicago metropolitan area. The state police entered his temporary license plate into the highway monitoring database. I sat in the emergency room waiting area while a physician cleaned and sutured Marcus' arm. The sting of the betrayal had faded, replaced by a cold, operational clarity. Derek had chosen his path. He had tried to crush my skull to fund his escape from the criminal underworld. He was bleeding, isolated, and hunted by 2 distinct factions. The state police wanted him in a concrete cell. The identity fraud syndicate wanted him in a shallow grave, with the city grid locked down and every toll booth scanning for his vehicle. He had no avenues of escape. He could not leave the county. He could not seek medical attention for his injuries. He had only one remaining coordinate on the map. He would drag his shattered life back to the only structure where the doors would still open for him, forcing our parents to make a final, fatal decision. Friday evening descended on the Chicago suburbs, bringing a bitter wind that stripped the remaining dead leaves from the oak trees. The quiet residential street maintained its illusion of domestic tranquility. Save for one property, the shattered picture window on my parents' front living room wall was now covered by a thick sheet of industrial plastic, held in place by silver duct tape. The plastic flapped rhythmically against the siding, a stark visual indicator of a breached fortress. Inside the house, the temperature had dropped, matching the suffocating atmosphere of paranoia settling over the occupants. Derek did not drive the rusted sedan into the neighborhood. He was disorganized, but he possessed the basic survival instincts of a hunted animal. He abandoned the stolen vehicle in a commercial parking lot 3 miles away, wiping the steering wheel with his sleeve before walking the rest of the distance through dark alleyways and utility easements. Shortly before midnight, a faint, desperate knocking echoed from the rear kitchen door. Nancy and Richard were sitting in the dark, jumping at every passing pair of headlights. Richard stood up, gripping a heavy metal flashlight, and approached the glass pane. He saw the silhouette of his son. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Derek stumbled over the threshold. He looked terrible. His dark hooded sweatshirt was torn at the shoulder, stained with dried blood from the bite wound on his arm. His face was pale, his eyes darting frantically around the kitchen. He was shivering, running on the final fumes of adrenaline after a day spent dodging police cruisers and jumping fences. A rational parent would assess the situation, recognize the severity of a state manhunt, and dial the authorities to negotiate a safe surrender. They would prioritize their child's survival over his freedom. But Nancy and Richard did not operate on logic. They operated on a toxic blend of ego and denial. Nancy did not see a violent felon who had just attempted to bludgeon his sister with a steel wrench. She saw her golden child, battered by a world that refused to recognize his potential. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him, pulling him away from the cold draft of the door. Derek collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. He confessed everything. He told them about the ambush in the executive garage. He detailed Marcus intercepting the strike, the struggle on the concrete, and his frantic escape through the shattered wooden barrier. He confirmed that the police were actively broadcasting his face on the evening news. He was the prime suspect in an aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Instead of expressing horror at his actions, Nancy redirected the blame. She wiped his face with a warm towel, whispering that none of this was his fault. She justified his attempted violence, claiming I had pushed him to the brink by freezing their bank accounts and refusing to pay the cartel ransom. In her twisted reality, I was the villain for defending my life, and Derek was the victim for failing to end it. Richard locked the deadbolt and drew the heavy kitchen blinds. He guided Derek down the wooden stairs into the unfinished basement. By moving him into the subterranean level, they crossed an irreversible legal threshold, providing food, shelter, and medical supplies to an individual actively fleeing a felony warrant is not a minor infraction. It is a codified federal offense. It transforms a bystander into a conspirator. The moment Richard handed Derek a bottle of water and a clean shirt, my parents officially committed the crime of accessory after the fact. They tethered their own freedom to his sinking ship, down in the basement. Surrounded by cardboard boxes and holiday decorations, they formulated an escape plan. The digital extortion plot had failed. The cartel was demanding $50,000, and the local police were sweeping the city grid. Remaining in Chicago was a death sentence. Richard pulled a small, fireproof lockbox from beneath a workbench. He cracked the combination dial and extracted $4,000 in emergency cash he had hidden from the bank freezes. He handed the stack of bills to Derek. Richard remembered a former subcontractor from his days in commercial construction, a man who operated a forgery ring out of a machine shop in Gary, Indiana. He promised Derek they would secure a fake identity by Sunday. They mapped out a bus route through the southern states, planning to smuggle him across the border into Mexico, where the jurisdiction of the Chicago Police Department ended. They felt a temporary wave of relief, sitting in the dim light of the basement, surrounded by concrete walls. They believed they had outsmarted the system. They believed the darkness provided a cloak of invisibility. They were profoundly mistaken. I was sitting at the kitchen island of my high-rise apartment, miles away from their suburban bunker. My encrypted laptop was open, displaying multiple data streams. I monitored the local police scanners and tracked the digital footprint of the arrest warrant. I knew exactly where Derek was hiding. I did not need a GPS tracker or a network packet trace to locate him. Predictive behavioral analysis is a core component of security architecture. When a threat actor exhausts their resources, they default to their most reliable safe haven. Derek had no money, No criminal network willing to shelter a high-profile target, and no survival skills. He had only one remaining coordinate on the board. I picked up my secure phone. I did not dial the local police precinct. Local law enforcement agencies rely on standard operating procedures. If I called the municipal dispatcher, they would send 2 uniformed officers in a marked patrol car. The officers would park in the driveway, shine a spotlight on the front door, and knock loudly to announce their presence. That protocol provides a fugitive with crucial seconds to slip out a back window, scale a fence, and vanish into the night. It also introduces the variable of a volatile hostage situation. I required a surgical extraction. I required an entity that specialized in hunting armed fugitives. I bypassed the local switchboards and dialed the regional field office of the United States Marshals Service. The duty officer answered. I did not waste time with emotional exposition. I identified myself, provided my security credentials, and relayed the active warrant number for my brother. I confirmed his exact physical location, noting that he was currently being harbored by 2 accomplices. The marshal asked for logistical details to prepare the strike team. I offered them an overwhelming tactical advantage. I accessed the Cook County Digital Property Registry, a database I frequently navigate for corporate real estate audits. I bypassed the public-facing portal and downloaded the original architectural blueprints for my parents' house, filed during a renovation project 15 years ago. I transmitted the encrypted schematic directly to the Federal Operations Center. I did not just give them an address. I provided a comprehensive structural analysis. I highlighted the precise location of the basement stairwell. I mapped the dimensions of the rear utility door. I identified a blind spot in the exterior lighting near the east-facing egress window. I detailed the layout of the ventilation shafts and the placement of the circuit breaker panel on the exterior wall. I handed the federal government the keys to the fortress. The duty officer confirmed a receipt of the intelligence package. He advised me to terminate the call and remain in my secure location. The machinery of the federal justice system engaged with silent, lethal efficiency. Back in the suburbs, the neighborhood remained deeply asleep. The streetlights cast long, undisturbed shadows across the frost-covered lawns. Inside the basement, Nancy handed Derek a plate of cold sandwiches. Richard reviewed a paper map, highlighting secondary highways, avoiding the main interstate way stations. They spoke in hushed whispers, confident that their son would be on a bus headed south by tomorrow evening. Outside, the silence of the street deepened. A convoy of matte black tactical vehicles turned onto the residential block. They drove without headlights, utilizing infrared optics to navigate the asphalt. The heavy engines operated at a low, muted hum. The vehicles did not park in the driveway. They stopped a block away, blending into the darkness of a dense line of pine trees. Figures clad in dark tactical gear stepped out of the vehicles. They did not slam the doors. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace, their boots making no sound against the frozen grass. These were operators from the Fugitive Task Force, individuals trained to breach fortified compounds and neutralize high-risk targets. They fanned out across the property line, communicating through silent hand signals and encrypted radio earpieces. 2 operators moved seamlessly along the side of the house, locating the exterior circuit breaker box exactly where my blueprints indicated. They stood by, ready to sever the power grid and plunge the residents into absolute darkness on the commander signal. A heavy perimeter team secured the backyard, training suppressed weapons on the rear utility door and the basement egress window. The commander and the primary breach team stacked up silently on the front porch, placing a hydraulic ram against the wood frame of the main entrance. The trap was set. The house was entirely surrounded by a ring of federal steel. Down in the basement, Derek took a bite of his sandwich. He looked at his mother, offering a weak, grateful smile. He felt safe. He believed the worst of the storm had passed. He believed his parents had successfully shielded him from the consequences of his actions. They were oblivious to the tactical boots resting inches from their front door. They were unaware that a countdown had already begun in the minds of the operators waiting outside. But as the federal commander raised his hand in the darkness, preparing to signal the breach, a new set of headlights turned onto the quiet suburban street. The marshals froze, lowering their profiles into the shadows, their night vision goggles locking onto the approaching vehicles. 3 dark, heavy-duty SUVs rolled down the block, ignoring stealth. They parked aggressively, directly in front of the house, blocking the driveway. The doors swung open. The syndicate had arrived to collect their debt, and they were walking straight into a federal crossfire. The tactical commander of the United States Marshals Fugitive Task Force knelt in the damp grass 100 yards from my parents' house. Through the green tint of his night vision optics, he assessed the sudden arrival of the 3 dark SUVs. 6 men stepped onto the pavement. They did not move with the disciplined, synchronized pacing of law enforcement. They moved with the brazen swagger of enforcers who believed they owned the night. The federal commander recognized the shift in the operational theater. The target residence was no longer just harboring a fugitive. It was about to become the epicenter of an armed syndicate raid. Standard protocol for a local police unit might dictate an immediate intervention, flashing sirens to scare the gang members away. But a federal task force operates with a different mandate. Their objective was to secure the fugitive and neutralize any armed threats in the vicinity. The commander issued a silent hand signal. The perimeter team held their positions in the shadows. The marshals would allow the syndicate to breach the front door, compressing all hostile targets into a single, enclosed box before springing the trap. Inside the house, Richard heard the heavy engines idling at the curb. He stood up from the basement table, gripping a heavy metal flashlight, his knuckles white. He walked up the wooden stairs, leaving Derek trembling in the dark. Richard stepped into the kitchen, intending to peer through the front blinds. He never made it to the window. The heavy oak front door imploded. The deadbolt tore through the wooden jamb with a deafening crack. The splintered door crashed against the interior drywall, taking a framed family photograph down with it. 4 men flooded into the foyer. They wore dark leather jackets and tactical vests over heavy sweaters. They did not shout commands. They operated with ruthless, practiced efficiency. Richard raised the flashlight, a futile gesture of defense. The lead enforcer did not break his stride. He swatted the heavy metal tube away with his left arm and drove a combat boot squarely into Richard's abdomen. The air rushed out of my father's lungs. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, gasping for breath, clutching his stomach. Nancy shrieked from the hallway. She turned to run toward the back door, but a second enforcer intercepted her. He grabbed the collar of her sweater, yanking her backward with enough force to knock her off balance. She fell hard onto the living room carpet. The enforcer shattered a porcelain lamp against the edge of the coffee table, raining ceramic shards over her head to ensure she stayed down. The illusion of their suburban safety evaporated in 10 seconds. The sanctuary they had utilized to enable a criminal enterprise was now under hostile occupation. The lead enforcer, a man with a scarred jawline and cold, indifferent eyes, surveyed the living room. He noted the plastic tarp flapping over the broken window. He stepped over Richard and walked directly to the basement door. The spotters had provided the syndicate with a detailed profile of the drop house. The enforcer knew the layout. He kicked the basement door open and descended the stairs. A moment later, the sounds of a struggle echoed up the wooden stairwell. The enforcer reappeared, dragging Derek by the collar of his ruined hooded sweatshirt. My brother was sobbing, his boots scraping helplessly against the steps. The enforcer threw him into the center of the living room, right beside his terrified mother. Derek curled into a fetal position, clutching his stitched forearm. Weeping openly, he begged for more time. He promised he could secure the funds. He babbled about a home equity loan and a frozen bank account. His words slurring together in a panic. The lead enforcer ignored the frantic pleading. He reached into his coat and extracted a customized, suppressed pistol. The matte black weapon absorbed the dim light of the living room. He pressed the cold steel barrel directly against Derek's temple. The weeping stopped instantly, replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. The enforcer reached into his interior pocket with his free hand and pulled out a manila folder. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table. "We do not care about your bank account," the enforcer stated, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "We know the transfer failed. We know the accounts are restricted. But this property is fully paid off. The title is clear." He kicked the folder toward Nancy. "That is a quitclaim deed transferring the property title to a holding corporation in Delaware," the enforcer explained. "The real estate market is liquid. We will sell the house to recoup the $50,000 your son lost, plus the cost of this collection visit." Nancy stared at the legal document resting among the shattered ceramic pieces of her favorite lamp. The syndicate did not intend to wait for a bank freeze to lift. They intended to strip the family of their final remaining asset, leaving them homeless on the street. "Sign the paper," the enforcer commanded. Nancy looked at Richard, who was still gasping for air on the foyer floor. She looked at Derek, whose eyes were wide with terror as the pistol barrel pressed indentations into his skin. The extortion was absolute. They had mortgaged the house hours earlier for a worthless loan, and now they were being forced to sign away the physical property to save their son. Nancy reached out with a trembling hand. She picked up a pen resting on the table. She clicked the top, exposing the ink cartridge. She leaned over the glass surface, her tears dripping onto the legal parchment. She placed the tip of the pen against the signature line. Outside, the federal commander issued a single, crisp order into his radio. "Execute." The operator standing near the exterior wall severed the main power conduit. The living room plunged into pitch-black darkness. The sudden sensory deprivation shocked the syndicate enforcers. For a fraction of a second, the men with the guns hesitated, their eyes struggling to adjust to the abrupt lack of light. That fraction of a second was all the fugitive task force required. The plastic tarp covering the front window blew inward. Two metallic canisters crashed through the opening, rolling across the carpet and stopping near the coffee table. The flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously. The concussive blasts ripped through the enclosed space. A blinding, magnesium white flash illuminated the room, followed immediately by a deafening shockwave that ruptured the eardrums of everyone inside. The sheer kinetic force shattered the remaining intact windows of the living room. The glass coffee table cracked down the center. Before the blinding light faded, the federal perimeter collapsed inward. The heavy steel ram smashed the remnants of the front door into kindling. A dozen federal operators flooded the foyer. Red laser sights cut through the dense, white smoke hanging in the air. The beams danced across the chests of the syndicate enforcers, federal agents. "Drop the weapons." The command boomed through the ringing silence, amplified by tactical megaphones. The syndicate thugs were hardened criminals, but they were not suicidal. They recognized the unmistakable silhouette of heavily armored tactical units and the overwhelming presence of specialized firearms. The lead enforcer looked at the red dot hovering over his own heart. He lowered his suppressed pistol, letting it clatter onto the hardwood floor. He raised his hands, interlocking his fingers behind his head. The rest of the gang members followed suit, dropping their weapons and dropping to their knees. At the U.S., Marshals moved like a synchronized machine. Heavy-duty zip ties were deployed with clinical speed. Within 20 seconds, the 6 syndicate members were pinned to the floor, their wrists bound tightly behind their backs, their weapons kicked away into the corners of the room. The chaos of the raid subsided, leaving the quiet hum of federal efficiency in its wake. The tactical operators activated the mounted flashlights on their rifles, sweeping the brilliant white beams across the ruined living room. The physical destruction was staggering. The drywall was cracked from the concussive blasts. The carpet was covered in plaster dust, shattered glass, and splintered wood. The pristine suburban sanctuary, the fortress where my parents had cultivated their toxic superiority for decades, was reduced to a devastated combat zone. An operator grabbed Derek by the back of his sweatshirt, pulling him away from the bound cartel enforcers. Derek did not resist. He was catatonic, his mind unable to process the rapid transition from an impending execution to a federal arrest. The marshal slammed him against the wall, kicking his legs apart, and secured his wrists with steel handcuffs. The fugitive hunt was officially concluded. Nancy and Richard remained on the floor, covered in plaster dust, coughing from the smoke of the stun grenades. They looked around at the armed tactical units securing their home. They expected the police to help them up, to treat them as victims of a home invasion. They still clung to the delusion that they were innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. A federal commander stepped into the living room. He wore a heavy tactical vest bearing the gold star of the Marshal Service. He surveyed the bound gang members, then turned his attention to my parents, Richard Thorne, Nancy Thorne. The commander stated, his voice echoing in the ruined space. Richard tried to stand up, brushing the dust from his shirt. "Thank God you got here," Richard gasped, pointing at the gang members on the floor. "These men broke into our house. They tried to kill our son. You have to get us out of here." The commander did not offer a comforting nod. He gestured to two operators standing near the doorway. "Secure them both," the commander ordered. Two heavy tactical boots stepped onto the carpet. An operator grabbed Richard's arm, twisting it firmly behind his back, and cinched a thick plastic tie around his wrists. Another operator pulled Nancy up from the floor by her elbows, securing her hands in the same manner. Nancy shrieked, the sound raw and confused. "What are you doing? We are the victims. They broke into our house. You are currently harboring a known fugitive with an active state warrant for aggravated assault," the commander corrected, his tone devoid of any sympathy. "You provided shelter and resources to an individual actively fleeing law enforcement. Furthermore, this residence is flagged as a logistics hub for a transnational wire fraud conspiracy. You are not victims. Ma'am, you are co-conspirators." The reality of their situation finally breached their towering ego. The legal shield they thought they possessed was an illusion. The federal government did not view them as a grieving family trying to protect a misunderstood child. The government viewed them as accessories to a felony. The operators marched them out of the house. The quiet suburban street was bathed in the harsh, rotating red and blue lights of a dozen federal vehicles and local police cruisers. The neighbors stood on their front porches, wrapped in heavy coats, watching in stunned silence as the pillars of the community were escorted out of their shattered front door in handcuffs. Derek was loaded into the back of a heavily armored transport vehicle, destined for a maximum security holding facility to await his arraignment for armed assault. Nancy and Richard were placed into the back of a separate federal cruiser. They sat in the cramped rear seat, separated by a thick plexiglass partition. They looked out the window at the flashing lights, the armed guards, and the smoking ruin of their home. The property they had just mortgaged to a predatory lender was now an active federal crime scene, destined to be seized under asset forfeiture laws. They had lost everything: the house, the retirement funds, their freedom. The parasitic ecosystem they had maintained for 30 years was permanently dismantled in a single night of tactical precision. But narcissists possess an astonishing capacity for shifting blame. Sitting in the back of the federal cruiser, facing years in a penitentiary for harboring a fugitive and money laundering, they did not reflect on their own disastrous choices. They did not blame Derek for bringing a cartel to their doorstep. They blamed me. They believed I had orchestrated the entire raid. They believed I had sent the police to destroy their lives. And as the cruiser pulled away from the curb, heading toward the downtown detention center, they resolved to use their final remaining weapon. They still believed the forged digital dossier Derek had created on the flash drive would serve as their ultimate salvation. They planned to walk into a federal deposition, present the fabricated evidence, and drag me down into the abyss with them. They did not realize they were preparing to step into an arena where I held all the keys, and the trap I had built for them was waiting to snap shut on the official record. 3 months passed. The severe Chicago winter melted into a bleak, rain-soaked spring. The physical wreckage of my parents' suburban home remained boarded up, seized by the federal government under asset forfeiture statutes. But the true battlefield had shifted from a shattered living room to the austere, wood-paneled chambers of the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse. A federal grand jury deposition does not resemble the chaotic shouting matches depicted in daytime television. It is a closed, suffocatingly quiet proceeding. 23 citizens sit in a tiered wooden box, tasked with reviewing evidence to determine if a formal criminal indictment should be issued. The air in the room is heavy with judicial authority. I sat at the prosecution table next to Assistant United States Attorney Elena Rostova. She was a seasoned prosecutor with sharp features and a reputation for dismantling financial syndicates. We waited in silence as the heavy double doors at the back of the chamber swung open. 2 armed federal marshals escorted the targets of the investigation into the room. The visual transformation of my family was striking. The arrogant suburban Polish had eroded after 90 days in a federal detention center. Richard, Nancy, and Derek wore identical, oversized orange jumpsuits. The bright fabric drained the color from their skin. Heavy steel chains bound their wrists to their waists, the metal clinking a hollow rhythmic cadence against the polished hardwood floor. Richard had aged a decade. His shoulders slumped, his previous intimidating posture broken by the reality of a concrete cell. Derek walked with his head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room, his unkempt hair hiding his face. Nancy, however, retained a dangerous spark in her eyes. The physical toll of incarceration was evident in her hollow cheeks and graying roots, but the predatory entitlement remained intact. She did not look like a woman preparing to accept responsibility. She looked like a cornered animal preparing to strike. They took their seats at the defense table. Their attorney, a hired litigator named Gregory Sterling, stood up. Richard had liquidated his final remaining retirement accounts to retain Sterling, a lawyer known for relying on theatrical misdirection rather than factual defense. The stakes were undeniable. The prosecution sought indictments under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, alongside multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and harboring a violent fugitive. If the grand jury returned a true bill, my parents and brother were facing mandatory minimum sentences that would ensure they died in a federal penitentiary. Prosecutor Rostova spent the first hour laying out the indisputable physical evidence. She presented the photographs of the stolen merchandise recovered from the basement. She submitted the fraudulent shipping manifests bearing Richard's signature. She detailed the armed syndicate raid intercepted by the task force. The narrative painted a clear, damning portrait of a family facilitating a transnational crime ring. The jurors took notes, their expressions hardening with every piece of evidence. The indictment seemed inevitable. Then, Gregory Sterling walked to the center podium. He did not attempt to deny the existence of the stolen goods. He did not dispute the armed raid. He executed a calculated, ruthless pivot. Members of the grand jury, Sterling began, his voice echoing with practiced solemnity. The prosecution has shown you a mountain of illegal activity originating from a quiet suburban home. They want you to believe that a retired construction worker, a homemaker, and a struggling young man masterminded a $20 million cyber fraud syndicate. I ask you to look at my clients. Do they look like digital architects to you? Sterling paced in front of the jury box, letting the question hang in the air. They are victims, Sterling declared, turning his gaze directly toward me. They are the collateral damage of a highly sophisticated, ruthlessly ambitious data security specialist. The true architect of this criminal enterprise is sitting right there at the prosecution table. A collective murmur rippled through the jury box. Several jurors shifted in their seats, their eyes darting from the prisoners in orange to my tailored charcoal suit. Sterling returned to the defense table and picked up a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside rested the cheap, prepaid flash drive Derek had compiled during his final night in the basement. The authorities seized this digital archive from my client residence, Sterling explained, handing the drive to the court clerk to be entered into the record. It contains the missing link. The prosecution claims Derek executed these complex financial hacks, But the routing data on this drive tells a different story. Sterling signaled his paralegal. A large monitor facing the jury illuminated, displaying rows of dense email threads and chat logs. These communications detail the purchase of synthetic identities and the coordination of black market freight. Sterling narrated, pointing at the screen. Look closely at the origin IP addresses. Look at the sender coordinates. They do not trace back to the suburban drop house. They trace directly to the encrypted corporate servers managed by Chloe Thorne. The forged documents filled the screen. Derek had spent his final hours of freedom crafting a masterpiece of digital deception. He had spoofed the headers, altering the metadata to make it appear as though the Syndicate handler was communicating directly with my personal work email. He had generated fake transaction receipts showing cryptocurrency flowing from the Syndicate into offshore accounts bearing my initials. Sterling leaned against the wooden podium, adopting the tone of a sympathetic storyteller. Chloe Thorne needed a physical location to receive stolen goods, a place entirely disconnected from her luxury high-rise and her pristine corporate image. She targeted the people who trusted her most. She used her advanced technical clearance to hijack her parents' wireless router. She ordered the merchandise using their address, treating her own brother as a disposable blind mule. And when the cartel closed in, she severed ties, froze their bank accounts, and pointed the federal government at her family to cover her tracks. The narrative was a venomous inversion of reality, but it was highly effective. It preyed upon the inherent fear everyday citizens have regarding technology and the people who control it. To the jurors, the story made a twisted kind of sense. A brilliant, wealthy hacker exploiting her blue-collar, technologically illiterate family. To seal the performance, Sterling called Nancy to testify. A marshal escorted my mother to the witness stand. The heavy chains around her waist clanked against the wooden enclosure. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Nancy delivered the performance of a lifetime. She did not yell. She did not display the vicious extortionist persona I knew so well. She weaponized her frailty. She hunched her shoulders, gripping the edge of the microphone. When Sterling asked her to describe the events leading up to the raid, Nancy began to weep. The tears were genuine, fueled by her own self-pity and desperation. We did not know what was in those boxes, Nancy sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly. Chloe told us she was starting a side business, repairing electronics. She said she needed extra storage space. We wanted to support her. We trusted our daughter. Nancy looked at the jury, wiping her eyes with a chained hand. Then strange men started calling the house. Derek tried to ask her about it, and she threatened him. She told him if he opened his mouth, she would ruin his life. We were terrified of her. She knows everything about computers. She can erase your bank account with a push of a button. We mortgaged our house to try and pay off the people she owed money to, just to keep Derek safe. And she let them arrest us anyway. She bowed her head, allowing silent sobs to shake her fragile frame. I lost my home, Nancy whispered into the microphone. I lost my freedom. And the person who did this is sitting right there, pretending to help the government. The courtroom fell into a heavy, judgmental silence. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted against me. I could feel the weight of 23 pairs of eyes burning into the side of my face. The jurors were no longer looking at me as a cooperative witness. They were looking at me as a corporate sociopath. Several jurors scribbled furious notes on their legal pads, their expressions tight with disgust. Even Prosecutor Rostova shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair. She leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. Chloe, Rostova murmured, her eyes fixed on the forged emails projected on the screen. The defense just introduced a documented digital trail linking the Syndicate directly to your corporate servers. The jury is eating out of her hand. If we cannot authenticate the origin of that flash drive right now, I have to suspend this deposition and open an internal investigation into your employment records. The threat of a malicious prosecution was materializing. If the deposition was suspended, my parents would introduce reasonable doubt. The RICO charges would stall. My corporate firm would place me on immediate administrative leave. and the federal government would seize my hard drives. Derek forgery, backed by Nancy theatrical tears, was on the verge of collapsing my entire world. Sterling returned to his seat, a smug, victorious smile playing across his lips. Nancy remained in the witness box, dabbing her eyes, playing the broken victim. Derek finally looked up from the table, staring at me with a look of pure, vindictive triumph. They believed they had won. They believed they had cornered me in a room where technical jargon would overwhelm the truth. The foreperson of the grand jury, an older man with stern features, cleared his throat and looked directly at the prosecutor. Does the government wish to cross-examine the witness or address the new evidence presented? The foreperson asked, his tone laced with heavy skepticism regarding my innocence. Rostova hesitated, her pen hovering over her legal pad. She did not know how to counter a complex digital forgery on the fly. I did not wait for the prosecutor to request a recess. I stood up from the heavy oak table. I did not look angry. I did not look panicked. I adjusted the lapels of my suit jacket and walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom. The heavy silence stretched, thick with anticipation. The jury waited for a frantic denial, a tearful defense, or a desperate plea for a lawyer. Instead, I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cold metal of a secondary, decrypted flash drive I had prepared 3 months ago in the subterranean laboratory. The trap they thought they had set for me was merely the entry point of the snare I had built for them. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, ready to dismantle their illusion and expose the raw, verifiable anatomy of their crime. I walked past the prosecution table and approached the wooden railing of the witness box. I did not ask for a recess. I did not consult with an attorney. I placed a small, heavy titanium flash drive onto the smooth surface of the wooden partition. The metallic clink echoed in the quiet chamber. The jurors watched me. They expected a defensive, emotional outburst. They expected me to fight Nancy tears with my own. I did not offer them a performance. I offered them immutable forensic data. Madam Prosecutor, I said, directing my voice toward Elena Rostova. The defense has submitted a drive containing forged email headers and altered chat logs. They claim I orchestrated the syndicate from my corporate servers. I am submitting this drive into evidence. It contains the raw, decrypted network telemetry from the router located inside the drop house. Gregory Sterling jumped up from his chair. He objected loudly, claiming I could not introduce unverified hardware into a federal deposition. Rostova stood up, her sharp instincts overriding her initial confusion. She did not back down. The witness is a certified data security specialist holding a federal clearance. Rostova countered, her voice ringing with authority. She is well within her rights to submit authenticated counter-evidence to refute a direct accusation of perjury and fraud. The grand jury foreperson nodded, instructing the court technician to plug my titanium drive into the primary terminal. The large monitor in the courtroom flickered. The forged emails Sterling had displayed vanished. They were replaced by rows of crisp, color-coded data packets. It did not look like a standard spreadsheet. It looked like the raw, underlying code of the internet. I turned to face the 23 citizens sitting in the jury box. 2 years ago, my brother began stealing petty cash and hardware from my apartment. I explained, keeping my tone clinical and detached. Knowing he had unmonitored access to my parents' home network, I anticipated a future escalation. I did not just change my passwords. I upgraded the residential wireless router in their living room. I installed what we call a honeypot. The jurors leaned forward, the technical term catching their attention. A honeypot is a decoy gateway. I continued. To the user, it operates like a standard internet connection. But beneath the surface, it functions as a deep packet inspection logger. It does not just record the websites you visit. It captures the encrypted handshakes, the biometric login telemetry, and the unique physical hardware serial numbers of every device that connects to it. I signaled the technician to run the primary script on the drive. Derek is not a sophisticated hacker. I stated as the screen began to populate with organized data trees. He used commercial spoofing software to change the names on those chat logs to make it look like I was talking to the cartel. But he forgot that a honeypot captures the media access control address. I pointed to the monitor. A green box highlighted a specific string of alphanumeric characters next to every single illicit transaction. That hardware signature belongs exclusively to a smartphone registered to Derek. I told the jury. Every fake credit card application, every message sent to the Syndicate handlers, and every shipping manifest originated from his physical device while he was sitting in that house. My corporate servers never communicated with that network. His forgery only changed the paint on the digital walls. The structural foundation proves he pulled the trigger. Derek sank lower into his chair. His chin rested on his chest. The defiance evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of a federal conviction. Sterling realized his client had handed him fabricated evidence. He sat down slowly, his face flushed with professional embarrassment. He knew his career was in jeopardy for presenting forged documents to a grand jury. But I was not finished. Exposing my brother was merely a defensive maneuver. The true payload of the honeypot was designed to dismantle the illusion my parents had constructed. Nancy sat in the witness box, her fake tears drying instantly. She stared at the monitor, a cold dread washing over her pale face. She realized the digital net had captured everyone in the house. My mother just testified under oath that she was a terrified, innocent bystander. I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. She claimed that she thought the boxes in her basement were for a legitimate repair business. She claimed she mortgaged her home solely to protect her son. I nodded to the technician again. The screen shifted from Derek chat logs to a highly encrypted offshore banking ledger. The honeypot recorded more than just my brother activities. I revealed, locking eyes with Nancy. It recorded the administrative logins for a series of virtual cryptocurrency wallets utilized by the Syndicate. Accessing these wallets required biometric authentication. It required a fingerprint scan on a specific tablet located in the kitchen of that house. The monitor displayed the login times, cross-referenced with the delivery dates of the stolen freight. Nancy and Richard Thorne did not just sign for packages, I declared, letting the sheer magnitude of their greed fill the courtroom. They logged into the Syndicate financial portal every time a shipment cleared their basement. The data shows they received a 15% commission on the wholesale value of every stolen item processed through their property. The courtroom remained paralyzed. The jurors stopped taking notes. They simply stared at the undeniable proof of a family enterprise built on theft. They were not victims forced into compliance by a violent cartel. I continued, my words striking like hammer blows against their crumbling facade. They were active, compensated logistics partners. Over the past 8 months, they used those illicit commissions to make advanced, lump sum payments on their primary mortgage. They knowingly laundered Syndicate money to pay off their suburban house. The illusion shattered permanently. The fragile, weeping mother routine Nancy had weaponized for decades was dead. She sat in the wooden box, stripped of her lies, exposed as a willing participant in a transnational fencing operation. Richard stared straight ahead, his eyes vacant, realizing he would never sleep in a real bed again. Prosecutor Rostova stood up from the table. She did not look at the defense attorney. She looked directly at the grand jury foreperson. The clinical precision of the evidence had handed her an unprecedented legal victory. In light of this authenticated digital telemetry, the government is modifying its request, Rostova announced, her voice cold and unyielding. The evidence proves a coordinated, ongoing criminal conspiracy involving all 3 individuals. We are formally requesting this grand jury elevate the charges for Nancy and Richard Thorne to fall under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, identical to the charges facing their son. Sterling did not object. He closed his leather binder, signaling the end of his legal defense. The foreperson nodded, the disgust evident on his face as he looked at the 3 prisoners in orange. The grand jury would return a true bill by the end of the day. The indictments were secured. The federal marshals stepped forward. They gripped the heavy steel chains binding my family and ordered them to their feet. The metallic clanking resumed. A heavy, rhythmic march toward oblivion. Nancy looked at me one final time as the guards pulled her away. There was no apology in her eyes. There was only the hollow, vacant stare of a predator who had finally been swallowed by a larger machine. I did not watch them leave. I packed my leather briefcase, snapped the brass latches shut, and thanked the prosecutor for her time. I walked out of the heavy double doors of the courtroom, leaving the suffocating tension behind me. I navigated the marble corridors of the federal building, passed through the security checkpoint, and pushed the heavy glass exit doors open. I stepped out into the crisp, bright Chicago afternoon. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the gray clouds, reflecting off the steel and glass architecture of the financial district. The air tasted clean. Society conditions us to believe that family is an unconditional contract. We are taught to endure manipulation, theft, and emotional decay simply because we share a bloodline. We are told to keep the peace, to absorb the toxicity, and to forgive the unforgivable. But true security requires a ruthless audit of your inner circle. You do not owe your future to people who treat your success as a communal bank account. You do not owe loyalty to a network that actively seeks to compromise your sanity. I built firewalls for a living, but the most important perimeter I ever secured was the boundary around my own life. I severed the infected nodes. I purged the malware. My name is Chloe Thorne. I trace digital ghosts. I dismantle corporate threats. And I do not negotiate with extortionists. Thank you for listening to my file on silent vengeance stories. If you have ever had to execute a hard reset on a toxic family dynamic to protect your own peace, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.